Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a nice idea if everyone can leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. It's hard for me to even think about what happened. I still get flashes of that weekend, the way everything spiraled out of control so quickly. The woods were supposed to be a getaway, a way to unwind from the daily grind. I thought we were going to have a good time, just the five of us. But none of us expected the nightmare that followed. It started on the second day of our camping trip. We had set up camp in a secluded area, deep in the forest, a place that wasn't too far from the nearest trail but far enough that we felt like we had some privacy. The kind of spot where you can hear only the wind and the occasional rustle of wildlife. No cell service, no distractions. We were there to get away, to relax. There was me, my friend Matt, his girlfriend Claire, and two others, Jake and Maria. Everyone was in a good mood that morning. We had spent the previous day hiking around, exploring, and just enjoying the peace of being out in nature. We even made a small fire, roasted some marshmallows, and had a few beers. It was nice. But things took a turn when we decided to venture into the woods to gather some wild mushrooms. Matt had done it before, and we all figured it would be a good way to add something fresh to our dinner. Claire wasn't too sure about it, but she went along with it, not wanting to be the odd one out. We wandered for maybe half an hour before Matt found some mushrooms he said were safe. He seemed pretty confident, even a little too confident. We weren't experts, but he swore by it. So we picked a decent amount, enough to cook with. By the time we returned to camp, the sun was beginning to set, and we were all hungry. We cooked up what we gathered with the rest of the food we brought. It wasn't long after we ate that things started to go south. At first, it was subtle. Claire mentioned feeling a little off, but she chalked it up to the hike. Jake seemed a little more tired than usual, but we figured it was from the heat. Matt was fine, or so he claimed. But then, about an hour later, Maria suddenly doubled over, clutching her stomach. Her face went pale, and her breathing started to come in sharp gasps. We all rushed her, asking if she was okay, but she could barely answer. She was sweating, her body stiff and trembling. I couldn't tell what was going on. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't allergic to anything, at least as far as we knew. But she kept muttering that she felt wrong. That something was wrong inside her. At first, we thought it might have been a stomach bug, or maybe she ate something that didn't sit right with her. But as time went on, her condition worsened. She wasn't just nauseous, she was shaking uncontrollably. Her skin started to flush red, and her eyes became unfocused. By then, Claire was panicking, trying to get a signal on her phone to call for help, but there was nothing. No bars. We were stuck. We tried to make her comfortable, but nothing helped. We gave her water, hoping it would settle her stomach, but it just made things worse. She started vomiting, and then she collapsed. That was when we realized just how serious it was. It felt like the air around us had thickened, the reality of the situation sinking in. She wasn't getting better. She was getting worse. I remember trying to calm Claire down, telling her everything would be fine, but I didn't know what to do either. We were in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the nearest town. No phone signal, no way to get help. It was like a nightmare that had become real. We knew we had to do something. The only thing we could think of was to get help, but we had no idea who to trust. Matt insisted it was the mushrooms. He started muttering about how some of them could be poisonous if you weren't careful. He had eaten them, too, but he didn't seem as bad. Still, his face was pale, and he looked nauseous. Claire wanted to leave and try to find help, but we didn't know the way. And we couldn't just leave Maria like this. We were stuck. We had a long conversation, trying to figure out who could leave and who should stay behind with Maria. But every time we talked about it, the situation seemed more and more dire. No one wanted to leave her. No one wanted to risk it. But we also couldn't just stay there and do nothing. We were all scared. Everyone was scared. Matt eventually volunteered. He said he could handle it, that he was the only one who knew the way back to the trail. The rest of us were in no condition to hike out, Maria was in no shape to move, and Jake and Claire were both starting to show signs of nausea too. I wasn't feeling great myself, but I was functional. Barely. I remember Matt leaving with a small pack of supplies. He said he would be back as quickly as he could, but none of us believed him. We all knew the forest was vast, and the nearest town was over 20 miles away. Even if he made it to the trail, it would take hours for him to get help, and that was if he didn't get lost or collapse along the way. Hours passed. We sat by the fire, the sounds of the woods creeping in around us, the stillness broken only by Maria's labored breathing. The night seemed to stretch on forever. Every time the wind rustled the trees, we thought it might be Matt coming back. But it wasn't. It never was. By the time morning came, we were all on edge. Maria was still out of it, barely conscious. The rest of us were exhausted, too sick to move properly. I checked her pulse and tried to keep her warm, but she was slipping. It was like she wasn't even there anymore, her body limp and unresponsive. I don't know how long we would have lasted if Matt hadn't come back. When he did, he was almost unrecognizable. His face was drawn, his eyes wild, and his movements were shaky. He said he'd found a cabin on the edge of the forest and managed to get to a phone. Help was on the way. But even then, I could tell something was off. He looked pale, his hands trembling. The rescue team arrived a few hours later. They took Maria and the rest of us back to the town. By then, we were all feeling better, though none of us were sure if we could trust what had happened. Maria had to stay in the hospital for a few days to recover, but she made it. We never did figure out exactly what happened, what had caused the poisoning, or if it was the mushrooms at all. We never went back to that place. I still don't know what Matt saw or did out there, but I don't want to know. Whatever happened, it was close. Too close. It was meant to be a relaxing weekend. Just a break from the noise of daily life. A few of us had been planning it for a while, booking a cabin out in the woods, far enough from the city that we could just disconnect for a couple of days. No cell service, no distractions. Just the sounds of nature, a few games, and a lot of food. We rented the place online. The photos showed a nice little cabin surrounded by trees. It was rustic, but that's what we were looking for. The cabin was small but cozy, with an open living space and a big stone fireplace. The bedrooms were decent, with comfortable enough beds. It felt isolated, but that was part of the charm. The first night was perfect. We cooked dinner together, cracked open some drinks, and spent the evening laughing and playing board games. Everything was fine. But as the weekend wore on, a couple of odd things started happening. I didn't think much of it at first. A door that was left slightly ajar when we were sure we'd closed it. The sound of footsteps outside when there shouldn't have been anyone else around. But it was so easy to brush it off. We were in the middle of the woods. It was bound to be the wind or an animal, right? And the door? Well, it was an old cabin. The wood could shift, the lock could catch funny. It was easy to dismiss. The last night there, something happened that made me realize just how wrong things had been. It was already getting late. Everyone was in the living room, winding down, talking quietly, but I had a nagging feeling. I'd been meaning to check something. The closet in one of the bedrooms. It's hard to say why I thought about it. I guess I just remembered that the closet door had been slightly open when we first arrived. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that I was alone in the cabin, that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Something about it just didn't sit right with me. So, I stood up from the couch, excusing myself, and walked toward the back of the cabin where the bedrooms were. The house was quiet, save for the distant hum of insects outside. The floor creaked under my feet as I approached the room. I reached for the door handle of the bedroom with the closet, and when I opened it, I froze. The closet wasn't empty like it should have been. There, sitting in the corner, was a sleeping bag. At first, I thought it might just be an extra one, but then I saw the trash scattered around it. Fast food wrappers, soda cans, empty snack bags. It wasn't just that someone had been in there, it was like someone had been living in the closet. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 days of staying there. Whoever it was had been eating and leaving their trash behind for longer than that. There were even crumbs on the floor. I could feel my stomach drop, but I didn't move. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. We'd been the only ones there. I thought back to the first night when I had checked the cabin, ensuring everything was locked and secure. There was no way someone had slipped in without us noticing. But here it was, a sleeping bag, trash, food wrappers. Evidence of someone who'd been staying in the cabin with us all along. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the mess. My heart pounded in my chest. My first thought was to turn around, go back to the others, but something stopped me. I felt like I had to keep looking. Maybe there was more, something else that would explain it. So, I stepped into the room and walked closer to the closet, my breath shallow. I could hear my own heartbeat, my steps too loud in the silence of the cabin. While I was right next to the sleeping bag, I stopped again, this time noticing something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A small, wrinkled piece of paper. It was tucked under the edge of the sleeping bag. I bent down to pick it up, careful not to disturb anything else. It was just a scrap, but there were words written on it, in a hurried, jagged script. "I'm sorry, but I can't leave now. I'm too scared." The words hit me like a punch. I stood frozen for a moment, the paper shaking in my hand. The air in the cabin felt suddenly heavier, as if I could feel someone watching me. I quickly stuffed the paper into my pocket, stepped away from the closet, and shut the door. My mind was spinning. Who had written that? Who had been in the cabin with us? I had to go back to the others. I didn't know what to say, but I needed to figure this out. I turned and walked out of the room, trying to keep my breathing steady. The hallway felt longer than it had before, as though the house itself was closing in on me. I went back to the living room, where the others were still talking, mostly unaware of my panic. I didn't know how to explain it to them. How do you tell people that someone's been hiding in the house with you, without you knowing? That thought alone sent another wave of coldness down my spine. I sat down on the couch and tried to act normal, like nothing had changed, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found. I glanced at my friends, trying to gauge if any of them had noticed something off. But they were all relaxed, talking about what to do tomorrow when we finally leave. Nobody else seemed to have the same sense of dread creeping up their necks. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone anymore. That someone was watching us from the shadows, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the the rustling of the trees outside the only noise breaking the silence. In the morning, we packed up quickly. No one else seemed to have the same unease I did, but I was eager to leave, to get out of that cabin. As we drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the window, watching us go. But there was nothing. I don't know if anyone ever found out who had been living in that cabin. I didn't want to go back and check. The only thing I know is that I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, and the eerie sense that we weren't the only ones who had been there. It started out like any other trip to the store. I needed to grab some groceries, so I decided to head to the local supermarket. I went in around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, thinking it would be a quick and uneventful stop. I wasn't in any rush, just picking up things I needed for the week. I noticed him right away, the man who was walking just a little too closely behind me in the aisles. It wasn't like he was standing directly behind me, but enough to make me uncomfortable. I told myself I was just being paranoid. It happens sometimes when you're alone in public spaces, right? You notice people, and sometimes your mind starts to play tricks on you. I moved through the aisles, picking up things off the shelves, and every time I turned around, he was still there, a few steps behind me. I went to the canned goods section, and he followed me there too. I tried to tell myself that maybe we were just going through the same aisles, that maybe we were on the same schedule. But the feeling in my stomach didn't go away. It kept twisting, like something wasn't quite right. I decided to test it. I walked quickly to the other end of the aisle, pretending to be distracted by something on the shelf. I glanced over my shoulder. Sure enough, he was still there, walking at the same pace, following me. I tried not to panic. People often don't mean anything by it. Maybe he was just shopping. But why couldn't I shake the feeling that he was keeping just a little too close to me? I decided to make a turn into the frozen food section, hoping I could get some space. As I walked around the corner, I glanced back again. This time, I caught him looking directly at me. His eyes locked on mine for just a second, and I quickly turned away, pretending to focus on the frozen meals in front of me. My pulse started to pick up. This wasn't right. I was starting to feel trapped. I went through the next few aisles, and every time I glanced over, he was still there. It was like he was attached to me. At one point, I turned into an aisle that was empty, thinking maybe I could lose him. I didn't see him for a moment, and I thought I had finally managed to escape. But as I reached for a box of cereal, I felt someone standing behind me again. I turned around quickly, and there he was, just standing there, looking at me. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. He didn't look dangerous, but there was something off about him. Something that made my stomach churn. His smile was a little too wide, his eyes a little too cold. He didn't move at first. He just stood there, looking at me, and it felt like an eternity. Then, finally, he spoke. "You don't look like you're from around here," he said. I didn't know how to respond, so I just mumbled something about living in the area. He nodded, like he was satisfied with my answer, and walked away. But he didn't leave the aisle. He just walked to the other end of it and turned back around. I didn't know what to do. My heart was beating so loudly, I felt like everyone in the store could hear it. I quickly grabbed what I needed and made my way to the front of the store. I just wanted to leave. I wanted to get out of there before anything worse happened. I tried to keep my head down as I moved towards the exit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. I glanced around as I pushed through the sliding doors, and there he was, standing just inside, watching me. I froze for a second, my breath catching in my throat. I thought I had lost him. But no, he was still there. I quickly walked to my car, hoping to get away from him as fast as possible. My heart was still racing, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my keys. I got to the car, unlocked the door, and just as I was about to slide into the driver's seat, I heard footsteps behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned, and there he was, standing at the edge of the parking lot, a few feet away from my car. He was just standing there, not moving, staring at me with that same unnerving smile. My breath caught in my throat. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice casual, like nothing was wrong. Like he wasn't standing there in a parking lot, blocking my way. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do something, anything, but I was frozen. I just stared at him for what felt like an eternity, trying to decide what to do next. He didn't make any move to approach me, but he wasn't leaving either. I didn't want to make any sudden moves, didn't want to do anything that might set him off. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get away. Then, finally, after what felt like forever, he turned and walked back toward the entrance of the store, never looking back. I don't know why he left. Maybe he lost interest, or maybe he saw someone else in the parking lot. I don't know. I didn't wait to find out. I quickly got into my car, locked the doors, and drove out of the parking lot without looking back. The rest of the drive home was a blur. My mind kept racing, my thoughts jumping from one thing to the next. I kept thinking about how close he had been, how he had followed me, how he hadn't left until I was almost trapped in that parking lot. I've thought about it every day since then. I can't shake the feeling that something was off about that whole situation. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just some weird guy, but I can't shake the thought that it could have been worse if I hadn't gotten away. I haven't been back to that store since, and I don't think I will anytime soon. Every time I drive by, I get that same feeling, like he's still out there, watching me. I was walking home from my friend's house late in the evening. It wasn't dark yet, but the sun was low, and I knew I needed to get back before it got too late. I usually take the main roads, but that day, I decided to cut through the alley behind the hardware store. It saved about 10 minutes, and I'd walked through there plenty of times before without any problems. The alley wasn't long. You could see straight through to the other side where it opened back onto the street. There were a few dumpsters and some old wooden pallets leaning against the walls, but it was mostly empty. I didn't feel nervous at first. I was just focused on getting home. I was about halfway down when I heard footsteps behind me. They were close enough that I knew they weren't just someone passing through. I glanced back and saw two men walking toward me. They weren't running, but their pace was quick, like they were trying to catch up. One of them was wearing a dirty gray hoodie, and the other had on a leather jacket that looked way too heavy for the weather. They didn't look like anyone I'd seen around before. "Hey, wait up," the guy in the hoodie called out. I stopped but kept a little distance between us. I thought maybe they were going to ask for directions or something. When they got closer, the guy in the hoodie smiled, but it didn't feel friendly. "Don't you remember us?" he said. "We've met before." I shook my head. "I don't think so." "Sure we have," the guy in the leather jacket said. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking a lot. "You were with your dad at that car shop last month, right? You had the blue jacket on." I hadn't been to any car shop recently, and I didn't even own a blue jacket. I told them they must have me confused with someone else, but they didn't back off. "Nah, It was definitely you, the guy in the hoodie insisted. He stepped closer, cutting off the path ahead of me. You're just playing dumb. I started to feel uneasy. My heart was beating faster, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I don't know what you're talking about. I need to get home. The guy in the leather jacket moved behind me, blocking the way I'd come. I was stuck between them. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall like he had all the time in the world. You're not in a hurry, are you? He asked. We just want to talk. Yeah, just talk, the hoodie guy said. What's the rush? I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to figure out what to do. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't want to pull it out and make it obvious I was calling for help. I felt trapped, and the alley suddenly seemed a lot longer than it had a minute ago. The guy in the hoodie stepped even closer, invading my space. You live around here, right? We've seen you before. You're always walking this way. That made my stomach drop. If they really had been watching me, I hadn't noticed. I told them again they had the wrong person, but my voice was shaking now. They knew I was scared. Relax, the leather jacket guy said. We're just being friendly. You don't have to act all stuck up. I took a step back, but it didn't help. The hoodie guy matched my movement, keeping the distance the same. His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder. You think you're too good to talk to us? He asked, his tone sharper. I tried to step around him, but he moved to block me again. The leather jacket guy pushed off the wall and started closing the gap behind me. I was running out of space, and they both knew it. Let me go, I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked. Go where? The hoodie guy said, almost laughing. We're not done yet. My hand was in my pocket now, gripping my phone, but I was too scared to pull it out. I felt like if I made one wrong move, things would get worse. Someone's going to come through here, I said, hoping to bluff them. This is a busy street. No one's coming, the leather jacket guy said. Why do you think we picked this spot? That's when I panicked. I bolted to the side, aiming for the small gap between the hoodie guy and the wall. He grabbed for me, but I twisted away and ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back, but I could hear them shouting and their footsteps pounding behind me. The other end of the alley felt like it was miles away. My chest was burning, and my legs felt like they might give out, but I didn't stop. I burst out onto the street, nearly colliding with a man walking his dog. I shouted for help, barely able to get the words out. The two guys stopped at the edge of the alley. They didn't come any further, probably because the street was busy enough that people would notice. They just stood there, staring at me, before turning and walking back the way they'd come. The man with the dog called the police for me. I was shaking so much I could barely explain what had happened. When the officers arrived, they took my statement and walked me home, but they didn't find the two men. They told me to avoid the alley from now on and to call them if I saw anything suspicious. I haven't taken that shortcut since. I don't think I ever will again. Even now, every time I see someone walking toward me, I feel a spike of fear, wondering if it's them. Wondering if they'll remember me. It started as just another drive home from work. The kind of uneventful commute you don't even think about. I was merging onto the highway when a black SUV cut me off. I hit the brakes hard, my seatbelt digging into my chest, and I leaned on the horn without even thinking about it. I wasn't angry, really just startled. The driver threw up a hand, like they were waving me off, and I thought that was the end of it. A couple of miles later, I noticed the SUV again. They were hanging in my blind spot, then speeding up to stay even with me. I glanced over, trying to get a look at them, but the windows were tinted too dark to see anything. I didn't think much of it until they swerved closer, like they were trying to nudge into my lane. I moved over into the right lane just to get away from them, but they followed, sticking right behind me this time. At that point, I started to feel uneasy. I checked the time, 6:30 p.m., and figured maybe they were just in a hurry to get somewhere, but my stomach was tight. I decided to ignore them and keep driving. If they were trying to mess with me, I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. But then they started following me off the highway. My exit wasn't busy, just a small turnoff that led into a residential area. I didn't think it was strange until I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them right there, just a car length behind me. There were no other cars around, no reason for them to be on my tail like that. I made a left at the light, and so did they. I made a right at the next street, and they stayed with me. My heart started pounding. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe they lived in the same direction. But then I took another left, this time into a random neighborhood I didn't even know, and they followed. I drove in circles for a while, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. But no matter how many turns I made, they were there, close enough for me to see their headlights in my mirror. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, so did they. I decided to test it. At the next intersection, I pulled into a gas station and parked right in front of the convenience store, where it was bright and busy. The SUV passed by without stopping, and I let out a shaky breath, laughing at myself for getting so worked up. But then, not even 2 minutes later, they circled back and pulled into the lot, parking just a few spaces away. I couldn't see who was inside. The windows were still too dark. I stared at the car, trying to figure out what to do. My phone was in my lap, and I thought about calling someone, but I didn't even know what to say. "Hey, I think someone's following me," sounded ridiculous. Instead, I got out and went into the store, my keys clutched tight in my hand. I lingered by the counter, pretending to browse the candy display while I kept an eye on the door. The SUV stayed parked outside. Nobody got out. When I finally worked up the nerve to leave, I took a long route back to my car, walking through the rows of pumps to avoid getting too close to the SUV. I climbed in and locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I decided to head toward the main road, where it was busier. If they followed me again, at least there'd be witnesses. Sure enough, as soon as I pulled out, the SUV did too. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I merged into traffic, trying to act like I didn't notice them. That's when they started speeding up. I was doing 40 in a 35, and they were getting closer, their headlights bright in my rearview mirror. I pressed the gas pedal harder, but they matched my speed, staying just a few feet behind me. I switched lanes, hoping they'd pass, but instead, they swerved into the same lane and honked. It felt like my chest was caving in. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what I'd done to make them so angry. Was it the horn? Was it because I cut them off earlier? I couldn't remember doing anything wrong. I spotted a police station up ahead and turned into the parking lot without thinking. The SUV slowed down but didn't follow me in. They rolled past, and I caught a glimpse of the driver's silhouette, a large figure, maybe a man, but I couldn't be sure. I stayed in the lot for a while, waiting for my nerves to settle. When I finally felt calm enough to leave, I didn't see the SUV anywhere. I decided to take a longer route home, just to be safe. I stuck to busy streets and well-lit areas, glancing in my mirrors every few seconds. I thought I'd lost them. I really did. But when I turned onto my street, there they were, parked a few houses down from mine. My stomach dropped. I drove past my house, not wanting them to know where I lived. Instead, I went around the block and parked in someone else's driveway, crouching low in my seat. The SUV idled for a minute before pulling away. I waited until I couldn't see their taillights anymore, then backed out and drove straight to a friend's house. I didn't go home that night. I didn't even tell my friend what happened. I just made up some excuse about needing company and stayed on their couch, staring at the ceiling until morning. The next day, I filed a report with the police. They took my statement but said there wasn't much they could do without a license plate or a clearer description of the driver. I started noticing SUVs everywhere after that, at intersections, in parking lots, parked along my route to work. Each time, my stomach would clench, and I'd have to remind myself that it probably wasn't them. I never saw the black SUV again after that, but I still think about it every time I get in my car. Every time I glance in the mirror and see headlights too close behind me. I still wonder who they were, what they wanted, and why they stopped following me when they did. I don't know if I'll ever get those answers. I was at the park last Tuesday afternoon, just trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace. It had been one of those weeks where everything felt off. Work was stressing me out, family drama was brewing, and I just needed some fresh air. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over everything, and there weren't many people around, just a few joggers and a couple of families having picnics. I found a bench under a tree, opened my book, and tried to tune everything out. I should have known the moment I sat down that I wasn't going to get much peace. But at the time, I thought it was just me being overly anxious. I'd been there for about 20 minutes when I heard footsteps approaching. I didn't look up right away, assuming it was just someone walking by. But the footsteps stopped. "Hey," the man said, his voice almost too calm. It wasn't a loud greeting, just the kind of voice that made you feel like you didn't have a choice but to acknowledge it. I glanced up. He was standing about a foot away from the bench, looking at me with an almost unsettling intensity. Mid-30s, maybe a little older, with dark hair and a face that looked familiar but not in any specific way. He wasn't particularly tall or imposing, but there was something about him that felt off. Like he didn't belong in this peaceful scene. "Do you come here often?" he asked. It's a typical question, right? One of those small talk openers. I nodded, deciding to be polite. "Yeah, it's nice here. Just needed some quiet today." "Quiet's good, yeah," he said, sitting down on the other end of the bench without asking. He wasn't close, but still, he was uncomfortably near. I figured I'd just finish my chapter and leave, but something in my gut told me to be cautious. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I could feel a shift in the air. He stayed quiet for a moment, then spoke again. "You like to read?" "Yeah, I do," I answered, trying to remain neutral, hoping he would take the hint that I was just here to enjoy the day alone. He leaned forward slightly, and that's when I started getting that prickling feeling along my skin. He wasn't just making small talk anymore, it felt like he was trying to dig deeper. "What's your favorite kind of book?" he asked, his voice low, almost too curious. "I like a lot of different kinds," I said, stiffening. "Just whatever catches my attention." He nodded, then smiled a little, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something unsettling about it, something that made my stomach twist. I tried to ignore the feeling, but it was getting harder. "Are you married?" he asked, his voice softer now, like it was an innocent follow-up. I raised an eyebrow, confused. "No," I said, unsure why he was asking such personal questions. But the tone of his voice was changing, almost like he was trying to dig into my life, piece by piece. "Do you live around here?" he continued. It wasn't a question anymore. It was more like he was gathering information, like he needed it for some unknown reason. At this point, I knew something was wrong. My hands were starting to sweat, and my heart rate had picked up. This wasn't normal. Most people don't ask these kinds of questions out of nowhere. And I didn't know if it was just the vibe he gave off or the way he was staring at me, but it made me feel small. Like I was trapped in this conversation without a way to escape. I tried to push myself off the bench, clutching my book like it could offer some kind of protection. "I'm sorry, I need to go." But before I could get to my feet, he stood up too, stepping in front of me. "You're leaving already?" His voice had dropped, becoming sharper. I was just trying to talk. I didn't answer, just took a step back. My body was telling me to move quickly, to get away from him, but my legs felt frozen. Wait, he said, his tone suddenly more forceful, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of frustration in his eyes. "You can't just sit here and waste my time and then walk away." I froze. What did he mean, waste his time? I didn't owe him anything. I barely even knew him. "I'm sorry," I said, now trying to move around him, trying to be polite but firm. "I don't know you. I'm just trying to enjoy my day." "You owe me a conversation," he said, stepping closer. "You don't get to walk away after wasting my time." I was now completely unnerved. I could feel my body reacting before I even had a chance to process it. My eyes darted around the park, looking for anyone, any kind of help, but the place was empty. The joggers had passed, and the families had packed up and left. It was just the two of us. I stood taller, trying to make myself seem less vulnerable. "I don't owe you anything," I said firmly, stepping back again. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking, but I wasn't going to let him see it. "Leave me alone." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might get angry. But instead, he just stood there, staring at me. The silence between us stretched, and I could feel the tension building, like he was trying to decide what to do next. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he just shook his head and mumbled something under his breath. "Fine. But don't think you can just do that. People don't just get to ignore me." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction, my heart racing in my chest. I could hear his footsteps behind me for a few moments, but when I glanced over my shoulder, he was no longer following. It felt like a lifetime until I reached my car and locked the doors. I drove home with my hands still trembling on the steering wheel, my mind replaying the entire encounter over and over. What had just happened? Why did it feel so wrong? Why did it feel like he was trying to corner me into something I didn't understand? It was just a conversation, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like I was the target of something much darker, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided a very dangerous situation. I haven't gone back to that park since. And every time I see someone approach me in public now, I can't help but feel that same unease, that same fear. I don't think he was just some random person looking for company. I don't know what his intentions were, but I'm not willing to find out. If anything, I learned to trust my instincts more, because I know now that sometimes people don't need to say much to make you feel trapped. I still can't shake the feeling. The cold, wet air. The sound of my own breath mixed with the pounding rain. And that feeling of someone watching, someone just behind me, every step of the way. It started like any other run. I was out on my usual route, the kind of run I do when I need to clear my head. The rain had been coming down hard all day, and I wasn't about to let that stop me. I had my head up, my shoes splashing through the puddles, and the rhythmic sound of my footsteps in my ears. The world felt distant, the streets quieter than usual, the kind of night where everything seems muffled by the storm. It wasn't until I was about halfway through that I noticed it. At first, I thought it was just the noise of the rain, maybe some stray footsteps from someone else running nearby. But then I realized. The footsteps were too close, too in sync with mine. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just my imagination, but it didn't stop. Every time I picked up the pace, the footsteps behind me quickened. Every time I slowed down, they slowed too. I glanced over my shoulder once, quickly, just to see if anyone was there. Nothing. Just the rain, the street lights reflecting off the wet pavement. But when I turned my head back, I could hear it again, the footsteps, still right behind me. I could feel my heart starting to race, the anxiety creeping up in my chest. Who would be out here in this weather, running so close? I sped up, thinking maybe I was just paranoid, but they kept matching my pace. The sound of those steps, heavy, deliberate, was starting to make my skin crawl. I had to stop. I needed to see who it was, to confront them. If someone was behind me, they were clearly following me, and I wasn't about to be caught unaware. I turned sharply to the side, slipping slightly on the wet pavement as I came to a stop, but still keeping my eyes on the street behind me. My breath was coming out in clouds, but I couldn't stop looking, couldn't stop listening. For a moment, I heard nothing. No footsteps, no movement. The rain kept falling, louder now, the only sound in the empty street. Then I heard it again. The footsteps. But this time, they were closer. I tensed, standing there in the rain, just waiting. My nerves were shot, every muscle in my body screaming for me to either run or confront whoever it was. I chose to turn around and face whatever was coming. And there he was. A man, just a few feet away, standing in the rain, looking at me with this intense, unsettling stare. I couldn't see much of his face. He had a dark hoodie pulled up over his head, the fabric soaked through. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket, but I could tell his posture was stiff, almost like he was waiting for something. I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "You following me?" I asked, my voice shaky but firm. The man didn't answer at first. He just stood there, staring at me. I felt the tension between us building, something in the air thickening with the promise of something bad. My pulse was racing, and I could feel my legs starting to shake. But I wasn't about to let him see that. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, almost a growl. "You're in my way." I didn't know what he meant by that. I didn't know if he was talking about the street or something else, but his tone was all wrong. There was no reason for him to be this close, this intense. I didn't know if he was threatening me or just crazy, but I knew I had to get out of there. I took a step back, trying to put some space between us. "I'm just running." "I don't want any trouble," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, though inside, I was panicking. The man didn't move. He just stood there, still staring at me. And then, before I could even think, he took a step forward. It was sudden, fast, and without warning. I froze, my feet rooted to the wet pavement. "What do you want?" I demanded, louder now, more desperate. I had to keep control. I had to. I wasn't about to get caught in this situation. But as I stepped back again, he took another step closer, closing the distance between us. The man's eyes narrowed. "I'm not done with you," he said, each word dripping with something dark, something threatening. I turned and ran. I didn't think about it, didn't hesitate for a second. I bolted down the street, heart pounding in my chest, every step faster than the last. The sound of the rain in my ears, the sloshing of my shoes in the puddles, none of it mattered. I couldn't hear anything but my own frantic breath and those footsteps, now echoing in time with mine. He was still behind me. I could hear him gaining on me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I could feel his presence, like he was inches away, waiting for the right moment to grab me. The rain was coming down harder now, a blur of water, and I could barely see. My legs burned with the effort, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Now I had no idea what this man wanted or how far he was willing to go. I turned down a side street, hoping to lose him, hoping he would just give up and turn away. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were right there. Closer now. I didn't know what he would do when he caught me. I didn't want to find out. I spotted a row of houses up ahead, the lights from the windows offering a glimmer of safety. I pushed myself harder, pumping my legs, not daring to slow down. I was almost there. I was almost safe. Then, just as I reached the sidewalk near the houses, the footsteps stopped. The sound of them, the heavy, deliberate steps, just cut off. For a second, I thought maybe he had given up. I didn't want to risk looking back, but something told me that it was too quiet now. Too still. I slowed my pace, but I didn't stop. I kept walking, the anxiety still crawling under my skin, the feeling of being hunted lingering in the air. And just as I was about to turn the corner, I heard the voice again. Low. Menacing. You can't run forever. I didn't stop running until I was inside the first house I found, knocking frantically on the door, not even caring if I looked crazy. When the door opened, I practically collapsed, still shaking, still drenched from the rain. The woman who answered looked at me in confusion, but when I explained what had happened, she let me in without a word. I don't know how I made it through the rest of the night, but I did. I never saw the man again. But I can't stop thinking about him, about the way he followed me, about the way he spoke, like it wasn't just about running anymore. I don't know if he was just trying to scare me or if he had something worse planned. But the whole night feels like a blur, just the sound of rain and footsteps, and his voice. I haven't gone for a run since. It was a late Friday night, around 2 a.m. I had just finished a long shift at work and was driving home, the streets empty and quiet, only the hum of my car and the occasional flicker of streetlights breaking the silence. I'd taken the usual route, the one that was closest to my place, the one I had taken a million times before. I was tired, probably more tired than I should have been, but I was looking forward to getting home and going to bed. The next few minutes are still a blur. I remember seeing the flashing lights in my rearview mirror and initially thinking it was just another car behind me, but the lights kept getting closer. I didn't think anything of it at first, maybe they were just going around me. But then, I noticed the car had no other lights on except for the flashing red and blue ones. It was weird, but it didn't register as alarming yet. I didn't panic. I just pulled over to the side of the road. The car that stopped behind me was unmarked. No police insignia or anything identifying it as an official vehicle. But the lights were enough to make me believe it was a cop, even though I could tell something wasn't quite right. The person who got out of the car was wearing a dark uniform, and their headlights illuminated their face just enough for me to make out the white shirt collar underneath. But he was wearing no badge. It felt strange, but I assumed it was some off-duty officer or maybe a state trooper. He approached my window and I rolled it down, trying to stay calm. I wasn't nervous at first. I'd been pulled over before, so this felt like any other traffic stop, even though I couldn't shake the odd feeling in my stomach. "Do you know why I stopped you?" he asked in a deep voice, leaning toward my window. I could smell something faint on his breath, but it wasn't alcohol, more like a faint musk of cologne or maybe a cigarette. I shook my head. I had no idea. "You were speeding," he said. "License and registration." I nodded and reached for my purse. I wasn't thinking much about it, just the usual stuff you do when you're stopped by a cop. I fumbled a little as I grabbed my license and my insurance card, handing them over to him. He didn't say anything for a moment as he looked at them. That's when the unease started creeping in. His hands were unusually rough, and when he glanced at my license, his eyes lingered on it a little too long. "I'm going to need you to step out of the car," he said, his voice suddenly sharper. I didn't question it. Maybe he just wanted to talk to me on the side of the road, I thought. It was late, and maybe he wanted to make sure I wasn't intoxicated or something. Still, something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. But I was tired, and I didn't want to argue. I reached for the handle and opened the door. I had barely stepped out of the car when I felt a hand on my arm. It wasn't gentle, it was firm, almost rough, and it sent a shock of adrenaline straight through me. I stopped immediately, my heart racing. "You need to step away from the vehicle," he said, his tone changing again, colder. There was a shift in his body language, and for the first time, I felt truly alarmed. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice shaky now. "I mean, why am I getting out of the car?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept holding my arm, and the grip tightened. My mind was racing, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. This was not right. No officer had ever made me step out of my car like this, especially in the middle of nowhere. "I'm just following procedure," he said, though his words sounded rehearsed, like he was trying to make it sound official. But something in his eyes made my stomach churn. It wasn't the look of a cop, it was the look of someone who had an agenda. His pupils were too wide. His breathing was too slow, too controlled. "I need to call someone," I said, trying to stay calm but my voice trembling now. I reached for my phone, but before I could unlock it, his grip on my arm tightened, and he pulled me toward his car. "No, you don't need to do that," he said in a low, menacing tone. "Just come with me, and it'll be fine." I tried to pull away, but he was stronger than I expected. His hold was firm, and I couldn't break free. Panic surged in me, and every instinct told me to run. But before I could make any kind of move, I felt a sharp tug on my arm, and then, like a switch had flipped, I realized he wasn't planning to let me go. This wasn't a traffic stop. This was a trap. He pushed me toward his car, and that's when the full realization hit me. The man wasn't a cop. He wasn't anything like one. He didn't have a badge, he didn't have a radio, and his car wasn't an official police vehicle. It looked like a plain black sedan, just another random car in the night. I kicked and screamed, finally managing to pull my arm free. I didn't know what else to do. I was terrified. The car behind him was parked too far to reach for help, and the road was completely empty. No one would hear me. My mind raced, and everything seemed to slow down, but in that moment, I knew I had to get away. I took a deep breath, ignored the pounding of my heart in my ears, and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care about anything except getting to safety. I sprinted as fast as I could, my feet hitting the asphalt harder with each step. The sound of his voice calling after me was distant now, but I could feel his eyes on me. I didn't stop running until I found a well-lit gas station about a mile up the road. I ran inside, gasping for breath, and told the clerk what had happened. He immediately called the police. When they arrived, they took my statement, and I found out that there had been reports of people being targeted by fake officers in that area for weeks. I couldn't believe it. They never found the man. The car was gone by the time the police got to the scene, and the only thing they could do was take my report. But I couldn't shake the image of his eyes, that cold look in his gaze, and the way he gripped my arm. I still get chills thinking about it. I haven't driven at night alone since that incident. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I'm just thankful that I got away. It still haunts me, though. The fact that I was so close to something terrible happening, and I didn't even see it coming. It's taken me a long time to finally put this down, and even now, I'm not sure I can make sense of it. It feels strange to even talk about. I never thought something like this could happen, but it did, and I'm still not sure how to feel about it. It all started a few months ago when a new guy started working at the office. His name was Mark. I didn't think much of him at first, just another guy in the cubicles, trying to settle in. I noticed he seemed to be friendly, always asking questions, a little too eager to help. He would chat with me more than with anyone else, asking about my day, asking if I wanted coffee, offering to run small errands for me. He was nice enough, I guess, but I started feeling uncomfortable after a while. His attention was a little too much, too often. But I brushed it off, figuring I was just being paranoid. Then came the first strange thing. One day, I came into the office, and there was a small plant on my desk. Not just any plant either, a little succulent, in a ceramic pot with a handwritten note that said, "I thought this would make your day brighter." I didn't recognize the handwriting, and there was no name. I stared at it for a moment, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to sound ungrateful, but it felt odd, especially coming from someone I barely knew. Still, I thought maybe it was just a nice gesture. Maybe someone was just being friendly. Maybe I was overthinking it. The next day, another gift. A coffee mug. It wasn't the same as the plant this time. The mug was just a generic one, but it had my favorite color on it. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too specific. But again, I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I put the mug in my cabinet and tried to forget about it. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. Little notes, small gifts, always things that felt a little too personal. A new set of pens with my initials on them. A box of chocolates with a message that said, "For your sweet smile." It was always just the right amount of thoughtfulness to seem like a nice gesture, but at the same time, it always felt off. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate kindness, I did, but the more these gifts piled up, the more I felt trapped. I never knew how to respond, or even if I should. I started to notice Mark more. He'd be standing a little too close when he talked to me. He'd give me this odd, almost vacant smile whenever I tried to step away from him. There was something about his eyes that made me feel uneasy. But he was always polite, always professional, so I tried not to make a big deal out of it. After all, I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. Then came the first incident that really made me uncomfortable. One evening, I was leaving work a little later than usual, and as I was walking to my car, I saw Mark standing in the parking lot. I figured maybe he was just waiting for someone else or having a smoke, but then I realized he was looking directly at me. Not just glancing over, but really watching. It was unnerving. When I waved and said goodbye, he didn't wave back. He just stood there, his gaze fixed on me. I brushed it off as weird timing. Maybe he was waiting for his ride, maybe he hadn't seen me leave. But the next day, when I got to work, there was another note on my desk. "I saw you leaving last night. You looked like you needed some fresh air." That was when my stomach dropped. How could he have known that unless he was watching me? I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just overreacting. But something was wrong. I didn't want to confront him, didn't want to make it awkward or escalate things, so I stayed quiet. But the weirdness continued. A few days later, while I was out running errands after work, I ran into him at a coffee shop. I hadn't told anyone where I was going, so the coincidence felt off. He smiled at me, a little too eagerly. "I didn't know you came here," he said. "I love this place." I felt my stomach twist. "Yeah, it's a nice spot," I said, forcing a smile. I didn't know what to do. I was trying to be polite, but my mind was racing. Why was he here? How did he know this was where I liked to go? Things only escalated from there. Over the next couple of weeks, I started noticing him showing up in places I frequented, cafes, stores, even the gym. He never said anything when I saw him. He would just smile, wave, and act like it was the most normal thing in the world. But I was starting to get scared. It wasn't just the gifts anymore. It wasn't just the notes. It was the fact that he seemed to be following me. I tried to avoid him, taking different routes home, changing up my routine. But it didn't seem to matter. No matter where I went, Mark always seemed to be there. At first, it was easy enough to brush off as coincidence, but then I started noticing things I couldn't ignore. I came into work one morning to find a picture of myself sitting on my desk. It was a photo of me walking into a store the day before. He had taken it from a distance, but it was definitely me. There was a note attached. "I like the way you dress. You always look so nice." That was the breaking point for me. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I could trust anyone anymore, not even the people I worked with. I'd spent weeks trying to figure out how to handle it, but this was too much. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. I went to my manager and told her everything. I showed her the pictures, the notes, the gifts. She was surprised, shocked even. She had no idea anything was going on. But I knew something had to be done. We decided to report it to HR, who in turn contacted the security team and said they would look into it. Mark was called into the office for a meeting the next day. And after that, he was never seen again. No one ever said what happened. There was no explanation, no word about whether he was let go or if there were any consequences. All I know is that he was gone, and the gifts stopped. The notes stopped. But I still feel uneasy sometimes. I still wonder if he's out there, watching me. It's hard to shake that feeling. I don't know what he wanted, and I don't know why he chose me. But I know I never want to go through something like that again. I don't think anyone should ever have to. Moving into a new neighborhood is always a mix of excitement and anxiety. My husband, Tom, and I had finally found a cozy house in a quiet suburb. The tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns seemed perfect for us. We were eager to settle in and make it our home. Our next-door neighbor was a man named Mr. Johnson. He appeared to be in his late 50s or early 60s, with graying hair and a reserved demeanor. Our first meeting was brief. He greeted us with a polite nod and a few words about the neighborhood. He mentioned he had lived there for several years and enjoyed the peace and quiet. Over the next few weeks, we had occasional interactions with Mr. Johnson. He was always courteous but kept to himself. He would wave from his porch or exchange a few words about the weather. There was nothing unusual about him, just a quiet man living his life. One evening, Tom and I were watching a documentary about unsolved crimes. As the program delved into various cases, a segment about a longtime fugitive came on. The man's face flashed on the screen, and I felt a jolt of recognition. The fugitive, wanted for serious crimes committed decades ago, bore a striking resemblance to Mr. Johnson. I couldn't shake the feeling. The similarities were too strong to ignore. I told Tom about my suspicion. He was skeptical at first, suggesting that many people can look alike. But the more we discussed it, the more convinced we became that our neighbor might be living under an assumed identity. We decided to do some research. We found old news articles and photos of the fugitive. The resemblance was uncanny. Details about the fugitive's age, physical description, and even certain habits matched what we knew about Mr. Johnson. Unsure of what to do, we debated our next steps. Confronting Mr. Johnson directly seemed dangerous. We didn't know what he might be capable of. After much deliberation, we decided to contact the authorities anonymously. We provided them with the information we had gathered and our suspicions. Days passed without any noticeable change. We went about our daily routines, though the tension was palpable. Then, one afternoon, unmarked cars arrived in the neighborhood. Law enforcement officers approached Mr. Johnson's house. From our window, we watched as they knocked on his door. He answered, appearing calm. After a brief conversation, they escorted him to one of the cars and drove away. News broke shortly after that Mr. Johnson was indeed the fugitive who had been on the run for years. He had been living under a false name, blending into communities to avoid capture. The revelation sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Neighbors expressed disbelief that the quiet man they had known was capable of such deception. Reflecting on the experience, Tom and I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that he was apprehended without incident, but also a lingering unease. It was unsettling to realize how little we knew about the people around us. The incident served as a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes, danger lurks closer than we think. I had just started my second year of college when things started to feel like they were falling apart. My part-time job barely covered my rent, and I was living off instant noodles most nights. I was tired of the tiny, overpriced apartment I was in and figured it was time to look for something cheaper. But finding anything in my price range was nearly impossible. That's when I saw the ad. It was posted on a roommate finding website. Room for rent in a quiet house. Free rent in exchange for help around the house. Message for details. I figured it was worth a shot. I was desperate. I messaged the guy, and within a couple of hours, he replied. His name was Carl. He said he had a spare room in his house and needed help with general upkeep, nothing too crazy, just helping with groceries, cleaning, maybe a little cooking. He sounded nice enough, and the best part was that he was offering free rent. I couldn't believe my luck. I didn't waste any time. I asked if I could come see the place. He said yes, and we arranged to meet the next day. The house was an older one, but it was clean and had a cozy feel to it. Carl was in his late 30s, I'd guess, maybe early 40s. He looked like an average guy, nothing off about him at all. He was friendly, welcoming, and seemed eager to show me around. He explained that he was a freelance writer and worked from home, which meant he was often around during the day. That suited me just fine, given I was mostly in class during the day and would be at work during the evenings. We talked for a while, and everything seemed perfect. He even showed me the room I would be staying in, which was a decent size and had a big window that let in a lot of natural light. I could already picture myself living there. The idea of not having to worry about rent was such a relief. Carl assured me that the arrangement would be temporary, but we could figure something out in the long term if I wanted to stay. It all felt too good to be true, but I was too tired to second guess it. A few days later, I moved in. Things went well at first. Carl was quiet but polite. He mostly kept to himself, and I didn't mind that at all. I had my own space, and I was getting used to the house. The only odd thing I noticed was that Carl never seemed to sleep. I thought maybe it was just a coincidence at first, but it started to get strange. Every time I came downstairs in the morning, I'd see him sitting at his desk, working away on his computer. Sometimes he'd be reading, sometimes writing, sometimes just staring at the screen. But no matter the time of day, I never saw him sleep. Not once. At night, he'd be in the living room watching TV or on his computer, and when I went to bed, he'd still be up. I figured maybe he was just a night owl or had some weird sleep schedule, but after a few weeks, it started to unsettle me. I was a college student, so I was used to late nights and busy schedules. But I had never encountered someone who just never seemed to sleep. I tried to brush it off as nothing, but something about it started to bug me. Then, one night, I noticed something else strange. I had been out with some friends and came home late, around 1 a.m. I had to get up early the next day for class, so I was ready to go to bed. As I reached the top of the stairs, I realized Carl's light was still on in the living room. I walked past the room and saw him sitting there, staring at the TV. He didn't acknowledge me as I passed, which was normal. He wasn't really the talkative type. But what was strange was that as I walked past, I noticed the door to my room was locked. I stopped in my tracks. I hadn't locked the door myself. I never locked it. I wasn't paranoid, but it struck me as odd. I checked the handle to make sure I wasn't mistaken, and sure enough, the lock was engaged. I tried to shake it off as nothing. Maybe I had locked it without thinking, but something about it didn't sit right. The next morning, I had to leave early for class. When I came back, I found that the door was locked again. I hadn't locked it when I left, and I certainly didn't have a reason to do so. It was the only door in the house that was locked. Carl's door was always open. I thought maybe Carl had done it as a weird precaution, but when I asked him, he just shrugged it off and said he had nothing to do with it. The days went by, and the locking continued. Every time I came home, my door would be locked. And it wasn't like he just locked it once or twice. It was every time, like clockwork. And it wasn't just a lock on my door. There were times when I'd come into the house and the windows in my room would be closed tight, even though I'd left them open. I decided to confront Carl. I don't know why it took me so long. Maybe I was too scared to know the truth, or maybe I was just so relieved by the free rent that I ignored it. But one evening, after a long day of classes, I finally couldn't take it anymore. I knocked on his door. "Carl?" I said, my voice shaking a little. "Can we talk?" He opened the door immediately. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a faint smell of coffee on his breath. "Yeah, what's up?" he asked, his voice a little too casual for the situation. "Why are you locking my door?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but I could feel my hands shaking. He froze for a second, then glanced away. "What do you mean?" "I haven't been locking your door." I shook my head. "Yes, you have. I've noticed it every single time. And it's not just the door. It's the windows too. You've been in my room, haven't you?" He didn't answer right away. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to say anything. But then he sighed, his face falling into an expression that I couldn't quite read. "I didn't want to tell you this," he began slowly. "But I've been having some problems. Some paranoia, I guess you could say. I don't know, but I'm just trying to protect myself. From what? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me for a long time, like he was weighing whether or not to tell me. Then he spoke again. I've been hearing things, seeing things. I don't know. I feel like I need to keep you in here. Keep you close. I felt my heart stop for a moment, the words sinking in. I had thought it was a little strange, but I hadn't expected something like this. I think I need to leave, I said, my voice shaking. I'm not comfortable here anymore. Carl didn't argue. He just nodded, standing there in silence. I packed up my things that night. It was a rush. I barely even looked at my stuff, just shoving it all into bags, scared that if I didn't leave soon, something worse might happen. I never went back to that house. I never spoke to Carl again. I still don't know what was really going on with him, but the whole thing still haunts me. I don't know if he was paranoid or if there was something more to it, but I know one thing for sure. I'm never trusting a free rent offer again. I've been riding the same train every morning for years. It's part of my routine, like brushing my teeth or having coffee before work. I sit in the same spot every time, a corner seat by the window, the one that gives me a perfect view of the station and the tracks as we pull out. I didn't think much of it at first, but after a few weeks, I started to notice him. He always stood in the same spot on the platform. Every single morning, he'd be there, waiting, looking up at the train schedule or sometimes staring into the distance. He didn't look strange, or at least, he didn't at first. Just a regular man, maybe in his late 30s, wearing a jacket, a bit scruffy around the edges but nothing out of the ordinary. At first, I didn't think it meant anything. Maybe he took the same train too. But then it started to get odd. The next few mornings, I saw him on the same train, always in the same carriage, always standing by the door as if he was waiting for something. Every day, he'd board the train a few minutes before me. Same exact spot. Same look. The first few days, I told myself it was just coincidence. People take the same train. It's not unusual. But then I noticed something more unsettling. One morning, I caught a glimpse of him sitting in the same spot I always sat in, just across the aisle. He was looking out the window, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was aware of me. It felt like he was waiting for me to notice, like he was making sure I knew he was there. After a week of this, I couldn't stop myself from looking for him every morning. He became a fixture of my commute. At some point, I realized that he was always behind me when I got off the train. It was subtle, but I began to feel it. He was walking at the same pace, just a step behind me. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a coincidence. But the pattern kept repeating. Every day, the same train, the same spot. He would always board just before me, sit in the same place, and follow me off the train. I couldn't understand it, but I started getting nervous. I stopped looking over my shoulder, but I could feel his presence behind me. It was a heavy, suffocating feeling, like someone was always watching me. One day, I decided to change things up. I wasn't going to take the usual route, the usual train, and sit in the usual spot. I needed to break the cycle, to see if this man was just a coincidence, or if he was somehow following me. So, I took a different train. The new train was a little less crowded, and it felt like a fresh start. I took a seat by the door, away from the window. I tried to act casual, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about him. Had I made the right choice? Was he really following me, or was I just paranoid? When I reached my stop, I got off the train and headed toward the exit. I breathed a little easier. No sign of him. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he wasn't stalking me after all. But then, as I walked toward the exit, I saw him. He was standing by the door, looking out, exactly where I had just stepped off. He was looking at me. He wasn't on the train I had just ridden. He wasn't even supposed to be on this route. I froze for a second. My heart pounded in my chest. How was he here? How was he always so close? He hadn't just gotten off the same train as me. He had gotten on a completely different one. And yet, there he was. He looked the same as always, calm, unbothered, but his eyes met mine, and I could tell he knew exactly who I was. He wasn't just a commuter anymore. He was something else. I couldn't explain it, but something in the way he looked at me made my blood run cold. I didn't want to stick around to find out. I turned and walked quickly toward the exit. My mind raced. How had he done that? Why was he following me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how carefully he'd been watching me. Every day, the same routine, the same pattern, until I'd finally broken it. But now, it seemed he was just waiting for me to change things up, waiting for me to slip up. I didn't look back as I exited the station, but the whole time I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck. I didn't go to work that day. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I kept going, I might be making the biggest mistake of my life. The next few days, I stayed home. I didn't take the train. I didn't go out. I couldn't bring myself to face the idea that he might be waiting for me again, like he always did. I couldn't explain what had happened or why he seemed to know exactly where I was going, what I was doing. All I knew was that the man I had seen on the train wasn't just some stranger. He was something more. Eventually, I tried to go back to my regular life, but it wasn't the same. The train, the route, everything, it all felt different. Every time I got on the train, I felt like I was being watched. Every corner I turned, every glance I made, I half expected to see him standing there, waiting. But every day, nothing happened. He didn't show up. I don't know what would have happened if I had kept taking that same train, or if he'd have shown up again. All I know is that I haven't seen him since that day. But I still wonder if he's out there somewhere, waiting for me to slip up again. I never thought something like this could happen to me. I've always considered myself cautious, but looking back now, I realize I might have been too trusting. This all started a few weeks ago, and I've had trouble shaking it off since. It all began when I started walking to work. I live in a small town, and the commute is short, maybe 20 minutes on foot. It's a nice walk through some quiet streets and a couple of parks. I've always enjoyed the morning air, the calm before the day starts. I'm one of those people who likes to get up a bit earlier than necessary, so I had the streets mostly to myself. One morning, I noticed a white van behind me as I walked. It wasn't anything too unusual. There are plenty of vans around here, especially with construction work and delivery trucks. But as I continued walking, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been following me for longer than a simple coincidence. It kept pace, staying a few car lengths behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just a van on a route, like the others. The next day, it happened again. I noticed the same van, white with no markings, right behind me. Same time, same place. Again, I brushed it off, but this time, I started paying a little more attention. As I walked, I tried to glance back casually, and I noticed that the van didn't seem to be going anywhere else. It just stayed there, following me down the street. The third day was when things started to feel strange. I decided to change my route to see if it was just a coincidence. I took a different street, one I usually don't use in the mornings. To my surprise, the van was still behind me, a few blocks away. It had followed me down the new street. My heart skipped a beat. There was no way it could just be a coincidence now, right? That night, I thought about it, tried to reason with myself. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was probably a delivery van, I convinced myself. Maybe it was just in the area. But I couldn't shake that feeling, the one you get when something doesn't seem right. I still had to walk to work the next day, so I tried to ignore it and focus on getting to the office. But the next day, it happened again. The same white van was following me. This time, I stopped for a moment and tried to look back without making it obvious. I saw the driver clearly for the first time. He looked to be in his mid-40s, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just driving slowly, as if waiting for me to move. At this point, I was starting to feel uneasy. There was no way I could keep pretending it was a coincidence. I decided to confront him. The following morning, I waited until I was a few blocks from my office. I made sure to glance back, and sure enough, the van was still there. I waited until we were at a stoplight and then turned sharply down an alleyway that led to a less busy street. My idea was to get off the main road and see if the van would follow. It did. It followed me down the alley, then onto the quieter street. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this go on any longer. I wanted answers. I didn't stop walking, but I turned onto a side street where I knew there was a busier corner with people around. I glanced back, and there it was again, the van, still following me. I took a deep breath, then made my move. I quickly crossed the street and stood in front of a small cafe, pretending to look at the menu posted outside. As I waited, I saw the van slowly drive by, the driver turning his head to look at me as he passed. I knew this was my chance. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and started walking toward the van, trying to act calm, like I knew exactly what I was doing. The van slowed down and eventually stopped. The driver rolled down the window. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a little too casual. I tried to sound confident as I asked, "Why have you been following me for the past few days?" His expression didn't change. He just stared at me for a moment, as if sizing me up, then shrugged. "I'm just in the area. I'm working nearby." "Working where?" I asked, my voice a little sharper than I intended. He shifted in his seat, but I could tell he was getting nervous. "I work for a delivery company. You know, just driving around. Nothing special." I didn't buy it. The van had no markings, and I couldn't see any delivery equipment inside. It looked like a plain, white van with tinted windows. "You've been following me for days. That's not normal." He just smiled, a bit too wide, like he was trying to stay calm. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it. It's just a coincidence. You're making a big deal out of nothing." I stood there for a moment, staring at him. There was something about the way he was acting that made my skin crawl. His eyes weren't right, there was a coldness to them that I didn't trust. It felt like he was lying, but I couldn't pin it down. My hands were shaking now, and I realized I needed to get away from him. "I don't believe you," I said, taking a step back. "I'm calling the police if you don't leave." The man hesitated for a moment, then started to roll up the window. "Fine, whatever," he said, his voice suddenly sounding annoyed. "You're crazy." And with that, he drove off. I watched the van disappear down the street, my heart still racing. I stood there for a while, trying to calm myself down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I didn't know who he was or why he was following me, but I had a horrible feeling that he wasn't going to stop. I called a friend as soon as I could, and I told her everything. She suggested I talk to the police, but I wasn't sure if they would take me seriously. After all, I didn't have much proof, just a feeling that something was off. But I couldn't keep living like this, so I filed a report anyway, just in case. It's been a few weeks since then, and I haven't seen the van again. But I still don't feel safe. Every time I leave my house, I check my surroundings, and I still sometimes feel like I'm being watched. Maybe I'm paranoid, but I know I can't just forget about this. I don't walk the same route to work anymore. I change it up every day now, just in case. And I'll never forget the look in that driver's eyes. I don't usually go to the doctor unless I have to. I'm not someone who worries about my health too much. But lately, I've been feeling a little off, nothing major, just some weird aches here and there, and thought I'd go in for a routine checkup. It had been years since I'd seen a doctor, and I figured it was about time. I found a new clinic near where I lived. It seemed pretty standard, clean, modern, nothing unusual about it. The receptionist was friendly, asked for my details, and said the doctor would be with me soon. I sat in the waiting room, flipping through a magazine, trying not to think about the fact that I was about to get poked and prodded by a stranger. When my name was called, I stood up and followed the nurse to the examination room. She didn't seem anything out of the ordinary, just a quick hello, and then left me alone with the clipboard full of forms. I filled out the usual stuff: medical history, family history, current medications. Nothing too exciting. A few minutes later, the doctor came in. I had only seen him in passing before. He was tall, in his mid-40s, maybe. Dark hair, a little messy, but he had a warm smile. I guess he tried to look reassuring, but there was something about him that felt off. "Hello, Mr. Grant," he said, shaking my hand. "How are we feeling today?" "Just a bit off. Nothing serious," I said, trying to sound casual. "I've been having some aches and pains here and there, so I figured I'd get checked out." "Nothing to worry about, I'm sure," he said with a smile. "Let's get you comfortable and take a look." He motioned for me to sit on the examination table, and I did as he asked. He asked a few basic questions about my health, how I'd been sleeping, what I ate, whether I exercised regularly. All the usual questions you'd expect at a checkup. But then, he asked something that threw me off. "Are you married?" he asked, leaning a little closer than necessary. I nodded, feeling a little uncomfortable. "Yeah, been married for about 6 years now." "Do you and your wife spend a lot of time together?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like he was fishing for something specific. I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to hide the confusion from my voice. He looked at me for a second, like he was thinking. "Well, relationships can sometimes affect your health. You know, stress, intimacy, things like that. I just want to make sure everything is okay with you." I wasn't sure how to answer. I had never been asked anything like that during a routine checkup. "Yeah, everything's fine," I said, brushing it off. "No problems." He nodded, but his gaze lingered a little too long, and then he quickly moved on to the next question. "Have you ever had any issues with anxiety or depression?" At this point, I started to feel like I was being interrogated. I mean, who hasn't? "But no, I don't really deal with anything like that," I said, shifting uncomfortably on the table. He didn't seem to let it go, though. He took out his stethoscope and listened to my chest, then asked, "How about your family? Are you close with them?" I stared at him, confused and slightly unnerved. Yeah, we're fine. I see them for holidays, birthdays, that sort of thing. But I'm not really sure how that's relevant to a checkup." His eyes softened, but not in a comforting way. More like he was studying me, trying to figure something out. "Well, you'd be surprised how much family dynamics can affect your health, Mr. Grant. I just want to make sure we're covering all bases here." I wasn't sure if I should be getting up and leaving, but I didn't want to make things awkward. I just wanted to finish the exam and get out of there. He continued with the examination, but his questions kept veering into uncomfortable territory. He asked about my childhood, how my parents treated me, whether I had any issues with my upbringing. The whole time, I felt like he was prying too much. It wasn't just medical anymore, it was personal. Really personal. When he moved to take my blood pressure, he asked, "Do you ever have trouble sleeping at night? Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night? Maybe thinking about things?" I could feel my face getting flushed. This wasn't normal. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I mean, sometimes I wake up if I'm stressed, but that's about it," I said, trying to make light of it. He nodded, but I noticed that his hand lingered a bit too long on my wrist. His grip was firm, almost unnervingly so, like he was waiting for something, testing something. I could feel my anxiety rising. "Have you ever thought about your health in terms of mortality?" he asked, his tone turning a little softer, more conversational, like we were having some deep, philosophical discussion. I blinked, not sure what he was getting at. "I mean, sure. Everybody does. But I'm fine. It's just a routine checkup, right?" He didn't seem to hear me. He just stared at me for a moment longer, then smiled again. "Right. Just routine. Everything looks good here. I'll have the nurse come in to finish up, and then you're free to go. But don't hesitate to reach out if you ever need anything else." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing. He had spent way too much time asking about things that had nothing to do with my health. And the way he looked at me, like he was studying me for some deeper purpose, felt wrong. The nurse came in a few minutes later to finish up the rest of the routine stuff, and I quickly dressed and left. I didn't even say goodbye to the doctor. I just wanted to get out of there. On my way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about that whole appointment. His questions had felt like an invasion of privacy, like he wasn't just checking my physical health, but something else. It felt like he was trying to get into my head, dig into personal details of my life that didn't belong in a medical setting. I didn't want to go back to that doctor. I wasn't sure if what had happened was intentional, or if he was just an odd guy, but I knew I wasn't comfortable with it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, what if he had been doing this to other people? What if he was using his position to manipulate people, to cross boundaries without anyone noticing? I didn't want to find out. So, I found a new doctor, one that I felt comfortable with, and I never went back to that clinic. But I haven't stopped thinking about that appointment, or the way he made me feel like I was being watched. And I wonder sometimes if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't an accident. I don't know how to explain it, but I think about that weekend all the time now. Every time I get an itch to go camping or rent a cabin, the memory hits me. It wasn't that I felt something was wrong at the time, it was subtle. But it didn't let go. Not then, and definitely not now. We were a group of 6 friends, close friends, the kind you've known forever. We decided to rent this cabin out in the woods for a long weekend. Nothing too fancy, just a small, rustic place tucked away near a national park. The kind of spot where you can disconnect, hike, and just enjoy each other's company. It was supposed to be peaceful, fun, just a break from our busy lives. The drive was long, and by the time we arrived, the sun was already starting to set. The cabin itself was a bit older than we expected, but it looked cozy enough. A wooden structure with a few creaky steps leading up to the front door. The kind of place where you could imagine spending the evening with a warm drink and good conversation. We unloaded our bags, set up some things, and then decided to explore the area a little before it got too dark. The first odd thing happened that evening. We were standing outside, just taking in the quiet. The air smelled like fresh pine in the earth, the kind of air that makes you feel more alive somehow. As we chatted about nothing in particular, one of my friends, Liz, pointed out that there were cigarette butts scattered near the back door. They weren't old either. They looked fresh. I remember she said, "Who's been smoking out here?" We all stopped for a moment, eyes scanning the ground. None of us smoked. At least, none of us did anymore. Not since high school. It was strange to see those cigarette butts, crisp and new, lying there on the dirt. We weren't near any main roads either, just a dirt path and trees surrounding us in every direction. Probably just someone passing through, Matt suggested, trying to brush it off. But it didn't sit right with me. I looked around. The back porch had a small set of stairs leading to the yard, which was completely dark. The trees were so thick back there that it felt like the woods went on forever. There was no sign of anyone, though. The place was secluded, isolated, even, and I couldn't imagine why anyone would come that close just to smoke a cigarette and leave. We figured it was nothing, just someone before us maybe, and decided to get some dinner and not let it spoil the mood. We didn't mention it much after that. The first night passed without incident. We stayed inside, ate, drank, and talked. We played cards, laughed, and stayed up late like we always did. The kind of carefree night that makes you feel like nothing bad could ever happen. But the next morning was when things started to feel off. I woke up to the sound of Liz asking from the other room, "Did anyone go outside last night?" We all looked at each other, groggy and confused. "What do you mean?" I asked. I swear I heard footsteps outside my window, like someone walking around the cabin. Did anyone get up to grab something or go outside? We all shook our heads. No one had gotten up, at least not that we knew of. But it was strange, none of us had heard the footsteps. Liz was spooked, but we all laughed it off, blaming it on the wind or some animal. I wanted to tell myself the same thing, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I couldn't shake. We went about our day, hiking through the woods and enjoying the fresh air. But as we came back in the evening, there was something else that made my stomach twist. There were more cigarette butts. Not just near the back door this time, but also along the side of the cabin. Fresh ones. It had to be the same brand, too long, slender butts with the same burnt filter, still wet at the end. And again, none of us smoked. "Okay, this is weird," said Matt, his usual laid-back attitude now replaced with a tinge of frustration. "Who's messing with us?" We went outside to take a closer look. I felt my skin crawl when I saw the butts were scattered in a clear trail, leading off toward the edge of the woods. It didn't make sense. Who would be out here smoking, and why would they be leaving their trash behind like that? We stood there for a minute, unsure of what to do. Our laughter had faded, and there was this unspoken sense of discomfort creeping in. None of us wanted to admit it, but the thought of someone else being out there, so close to our cabin, made us uneasy. We stayed inside that night, locked up tight, making sure every window and door was secured. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept imagining someone watching us from the trees, hidden just beyond the reach of our lights. The next morning, things only got worse. I woke up earlier than usual, feeling like I hadn't slept at all. I went downstairs to make some coffee and looked out the window. What I saw made my heart stop. There, in the yard, were more cigarette butts. But this time, they weren't scattered around. They were arranged in a perfect circle, like someone had placed them there intentionally. A twisted, strange pattern in the grass, like a ritual or something. I stood there for what felt like forever, just staring. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Liz came in, rubbing her eyes. "What's going on?" she asked when she saw me staring out the window. I didn't answer her right away. I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know what to say. All I could think about was the fact that someone had been here. Someone had been watching us all along. We weren't alone. Liz saw it too. She gasped. "What is that? Did someone do that last night?" "I don't know," I whispered. "But we need to leave. Now." The panic was rising in my chest. I didn't want to wait around to find out who was out there or why they were doing this. We decided then and there to pack up and leave. No more waiting around. I didn't care if we lost the rental fee or if it ruined the weekend. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Very wrong. As we packed up the car, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to step out of the woods or from behind a tree. But there was no one. The woods were eerily quiet, almost too quiet. The cigarette butts were still there, staring back at us, but they didn't seem to matter anymore. We left in a hurry, barely looking back. The drive back was silent. None of us said much, but we all knew. The tension was palpable. None of us had been comfortable since the first night, and I don't think any of us would ever feel the same about that cabin. I still don't know who left those cigarette butts, or why they were doing it. Maybe it was just someone messing with us, or maybe it was something worse. All I know is, I've never been back to that cabin. And I never will. Something about it felt wrong. Something about it still haunts me. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still picture the butts scattered on the ground, like a sign. A warning. And I can't shake the feeling that someone who wasn't part of our group was there the whole time, watching us from the shadows. I had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to getting home. The train schedule was messed up again, so I decided to get a rideshare instead. I pulled up my app, entered my destination, and ordered the ride. I was tired and didn't think much about it. The car showed up fairly quickly, and I got in. The driver didn't say much when I hopped in, just nodded and started driving. I sat back and opened my phone to catch up on some messages. The car seemed to be moving in the right direction at first. But after a few turns, I started to feel like we weren't heading toward my neighborhood anymore. I looked up. The streetlights were becoming sparse, and the roads were getting quieter. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself maybe there was just some traffic or a detour. But after a few more minutes, I couldn't ignore it. We were definitely getting farther from where I needed to go. I sat up and asked, "Hey, are you sure you're going the right way?" I tried to sound casual, but I could hear the edge in my voice. The driver didn't respond right away. He kept his eyes on the road, hands firmly gripping the wheel. The streetlights were now almost non-existent, and I could barely see anything outside the window. It felt like we were driving through some industrial area. "Hey," I said again, this time a little louder. "Where are we going?" "You're not going the right way." The driver glanced in the rearview mirror but didn't speak. That's when I started to feel a knot forming in my stomach. I pressed the button to unlock the door, planning to get out. But when I reached for the handle, I realized the child lock was on. I tried to stay calm, but the car was now on a deserted road, with only a few faint lights off in the distance. I was pretty sure we were nowhere near my place. I started to feel panic creeping in. Pull over. I don't want to go any farther. Stop the car right now. The driver didn't answer. He just kept driving, his expression never changing. It was like he didn't hear me at all. I was starting to feel trapped. I looked at my phone. The app showed we were getting farther from my destination, but there wasn't much signal. The screen kept freezing, and the map was taking forever to load. I tried to call the ride service, but the call wouldn't go through. "Can you just stop?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm serious. I don't feel comfortable. Pull over now." Still nothing. I glanced over at the driver. He was wearing some kind of uniform, but I didn't recognize it. His face was expressionless. I couldn't tell if he was trying to look calm or if he was just blank. I started feeling that gut-wrenching sense of something being terribly wrong. I quickly scanned the area outside the window again. There were no cars around. No signs of life. I wasn't even sure which direction we were going at this point. I reached for my phone again and tried to message someone, but it was useless. The signal was completely gone. I couldn't take it anymore. I unbuckled my seatbelt and pushed hard on the door handle, but it didn't budge. I tried to pull the handle again, even harder, but it was useless. The door was locked. My heart started racing. My head was spinning. I felt trapped, and every time I looked at the driver, he wouldn't even acknowledge me. It was like I wasn't even there. I took a deep breath and told myself not to panic. I had to figure this out. I looked around the car, trying to think of something, anything that might give me a clue about what was happening. There was nothing. No signs, no help, no way out. I turned to the driver again. "Stop the car," I said, my voice trembling now. "Please, stop the car." The driver didn't even glance at me this time. He just kept his eyes forward, his expression cold. I had to do something, or I was never going to get out of here. In a split second, I made up my mind. I reached for the door handle again, but this time, I did something different. I grabbed the sleeve of my jacket and used it to protect my hand. I yanked the handle with everything I had. This time, it gave. The door popped open. Before the car could slow down, I didn't think twice. I just shoved myself out of the seat and pushed myself out of the moving car. My legs hit the ground hard, and I stumbled but kept moving. I had no idea where I was, but I didn't care. I ran as fast as I could, looking over my shoulder every few seconds. The car didn't stop. I could hear it speeding off into the distance, and I didn't look back. I don't remember how long I ran for, but I finally made it to a lit street. There were a few houses nearby. I knocked on the first door I saw, and luckily, the person inside was kind enough to let me use their phone. I called for another ride, explained what had happened, and waited for help. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't been able to get out of that car. I still don't know who the driver was or what his intentions were. I don't want to think about it. But I'll never forget the way he ignored me, the way he didn't even acknowledge my presence. It felt like I was invisible to him, and that's what scared me the most. I still take ride shares, but I'm a lot more careful now. I never take anything for granted. And I always check that my door is unlocked. Always. When I checked into the hotel, it was already late. I'd been driving all day, and all I wanted was to take a shower and sleep. The hotel wasn't anything fancy, just one of those chain places off the highway, but it looked clean enough from the outside. The woman at the front desk was polite. She handed me my key card, smiled, and told me my room was on the 3rd floor. The elevator creaked a bit on the way up, but I didn't think much of it. When I got to my room, I slid the key card in, and the little green light blinked. I pushed the door open, but it stopped short, like something was blocking it. At first, I thought maybe the door was sticking or the latch hadn't fully disengaged. I gave it another push, harder this time, and it opened enough for me to see inside. There was a man standing in the middle of the room. I froze. He didn't look surprised to see me, and that was the first thing that set me on edge. He just stood there, calm, like he'd been expecting me. He wasn't holding anything, wasn't doing anything threatening, but the way he stared, it was cold, detached. "This is my room," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked a little. He didn't respond. Just stood there, watching me. I glanced down the hallway, half expecting someone to jump out and say this was some kind of prank, but it was empty. "Did they give you the wrong room too?" I asked, trying again, even though I already knew something wasn't right. The man tilted his head slightly, like he was considering my question. Then, finally, he spoke. "This room is occupied." I felt a chill run through me. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Slow, deliberate. Like he wasn't telling me, but warning me. "I just checked in," I said, stepping back into the hallway. There must be some kind of mistake. He didn't answer. I slowly closed the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then I turned and headed straight back to the elevator. When I got back to the front desk, the woman looked up, surprised to see me. I told her there was someone in my room. At first, she seemed confused, but then she frowned and started typing on her computer. "That's not possible," she said after a moment. "Room 314 hasn't been checked out to anyone." I stared at her, waiting for her to say something else, but she just looked back at me like she didn't believe me. "I'm telling you, there's a man in there," I said. "He said the room was occupied." She hesitated, then picked up the phone and called someone. I couldn't hear much of the conversation, but she kept glancing at me, her brow furrowed. When she hung up, she said she'd send someone up to check. She offered me a new room in the meantime, but I wasn't sure I even wanted to stay there anymore. A maintenance worker met me at the elevator a few minutes later. He had a key of his own and told me to stay in the hallway while he checked the room. I watched as he opened the door and stepped inside. He was in there for what felt like forever, and when he finally came back out, he looked at me, confused. "There's no one in there," he said. I didn't believe him. "I saw him," I insisted. He was standing right in the middle of the room. The worker just shrugged. Maybe he left before I got here. "Door's clear now, though." I didn't want to go back in, but the thought of leaving without my things, my suitcase, my laptop, kept me rooted there. The worker handed me my key card and left, and I hesitated before stepping inside. The room was empty. Completely empty. No sign of a man, no sign anyone had been there. My suitcase was still where I'd left it by the door, untouched. The bed was made, the bathroom light was off, and nothing looked out of place. I locked the door behind me, double-checked it, and even dragged the desk chair in front of it, just in case. I didn't feel safe, but I didn't know what else to do. I tried to convince myself that maybe the worker was right, that the man had just slipped out while I was downstairs. But then I noticed something. The room smelled faintly of cigarettes. It was subtle, but definitely there. The hotel was non-smoking, and I hadn't smelled it when I first walked in. I checked the trash can, the bathroom, even under the bed, but there was nothing. No ashtray, no butt, nothing. I tried to shake it off and focus on getting ready for bed. I took the fastest shower of my life, keeping the bathroom door locked and the curtain half open so I could see out. When I finally crawled into bed, I left the lamp on, even though I knew it wouldn't really make a difference. I didn't sleep well. Every little sound made me jump, the hum of the air conditioner, the creak of the building settling, even my own breathing. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to a soft noise. It took me a second to realize what it was. The chair I'd wedged under the door handle was moving. My heart felt like it stopped. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, listening as the chair scraped against the floor. Then I heard the lock click, and the door creaked open an inch before catching on the chain. Whoever was on the other side didn't try to force it. They just stood there, silent. I grabbed my phone and dialed the front desk. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. When the woman answered, I whispered that someone was trying to get into my room. She said she'd send security up immediately. I didn't move until I heard footsteps in the hallway and a man's voice calling out, asking if everything was okay. When I opened the door, there were 2 security guards standing there. I told them what happened, and they checked the hallway, but it was empty. The only thing they found was the chair, still sitting in the middle of the room. I checked out first thing in the morning. The woman at the desk apologized and said she didn't know how it could have happened. She offered me a refund, but I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. I still don't know who that man was or how he got into the room. The door had been locked, and the only key card should have been mine in the hotel's. But I know what I saw, and I know someone tried to come back later that night. It started out as a dumb idea. My friends dared me to hide out in the department store after closing. They said I wouldn't last an hour alone after the lights went off. We'd been hanging out at the mall all afternoon, and by the time we came up with the plan, it was almost closing time. They left before the staff started their final rounds, leaving me alone to figure out how to stay unnoticed. I found a spot behind a rack of winter coats in the men's section. It wasn't perfect, but it was quiet, and the coats hum low enough to block me from sight. I crouched there, waiting, listening as the last announcements played overhead and the store got quieter. Eventually, I heard the sound of the security gates rolling down at the entrances. When everything was silent, I crawled out. The store looked strange in the dark, all shadows and empty aisles. It wasn't scary, not yet. Mostly, it felt like I'd stepped into another world. I walked through the aisles, trying not to make too much noise. My plan was to stay for a couple of hours, take a few pictures to prove I'd done it, and then sneak out when the gates reopened in the morning. I headed to the electronics section first. The TV displays were off, but a few laptops were still on, their screens casting faint blue light. I took out my phone to record a video, whispering into the mic about how I was all alone. That's when I heard the first noise, a sharp, metallic clink, like a door handle being turned. I froze, holding my breath, and looked around. Nothing moved. The sound didn't come again, so I told myself it was just part of the store settling. I kept walking, heading toward the toy section. That's when I saw the flashlight. It was faint at first, a beam of light sweeping across the floor on the far side of the store. My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought about security. I figured they'd just lock the doors and leave, maybe check the cameras once in a while. But someone was definitely inside, moving through the aisles. I ducked behind a shelf and tried to think. If they caught me, I'd be in trouble. Maybe not arrested, but definitely banned from the mall, and my parents would kill me. I decided to wait until the light passed and then find a better hiding spot until the person left. But the light didn't pass. It got closer. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, like whoever it was wasn't in any hurry. I crouched lower, pressing myself against the back of the shelf. The footsteps stopped, and I held my breath, listening. Then I heard a voice. "I know you're in here." It wasn't loud, but it carried through the silence of the store. The tone was flat, almost casual, but there was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. "I saw you on the cameras," the voice continued. "Come out now, and this will be easy." I didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid he'd hear it. I peeked through a gap in the shelves and saw the flashlight beam swinging back and forth. The man holding it was wearing a uniform, but it didn't look like the mall security I'd seen before. His shirt was too loose, untucked, and there was no badge. Just a dark shape stitched over the pocket. He walked past my aisle, the light sweeping dangerously close to where I was hiding. I stayed frozen, trying to keep my breathing as quiet as possible. After a few seconds, he moved on, but I didn't feel safe. Something about him wasn't right. When I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore, I crept out and headed toward the back of the store, where the employee-only area was. My new plan was to hide in the stockroom until morning. The store's cameras couldn't see back there, and I figured the man wouldn't bother checking. The stockroom was cold and smelled like cardboard. Rows of shelves stretched out in every direction, filled with boxes and loose items. I found a spot behind a stack of pallets and sat down, trying to calm myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out. There was a message from one of my friends. "Did you chicken out yet?" I started typing a reply when I heard the sound of a door opening nearby. The stockroom door. I shoved my phone into my pocket and scrambled deeper into the pallets, crouching low. The man's footsteps were heavier now, echoing in the quiet space. His flashlight beam cut through the gaps between the shelves, searching. He didn't say anything this time, just walked slowly, methodically. I realized then that he wasn't looking for a thief or someone breaking the rules. He was hunting. I held my breath as the light passed over the pallets where I was hiding. It lingered for a second, then moved on. The footsteps grew fainter, and I thought he might be leaving, but then they stopped. "Do you think I won't find you?" he said. His voice was closer than I expected. "This is my place. My rules." I felt a wave of panic. I couldn't stay there. If he found me, I didn't think he'd just kick me out. There was something wrong with him, something dangerous. I waited until his light moved away, then crawled out from my hiding spot and headed toward the exit. I made it back to the sales floor without being seen. The store was even darker now, and I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. I moved as quickly as I could, trying to stay quiet. The front doors were just ahead, and I could see the faint glow of the mall's lights beyond the gates. I thought I was going to make it. Then I heard the sound of keys jingling behind me. I turned and saw the man standing at the edge of the aisle. He wasn't shining his flashlight anymore, but I could see him clearly enough. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. He smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. "Leaving already?" he asked. I didn't answer. I turned and ran toward the front doors, my sneakers squeaking on the tile. I heard him running behind me, his footsteps faster now, closing the distance. When I reached the gate, I grabbed the bars and shook them, but they didn't budge. The locks were solid, and there was no way I could squeeze through. I looked around, desperate for another way out, and saw the fire exit sign glowing in the distance. I sprinted for it, my legs burning, my lungs aching. The man was still behind me, but I didn't look back. When I reached the fire exit, I slammed into the bar and pushed it open. The alarm blared, deafening, but I didn't care. I ran outside into the cold night air, my chest heaving. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across the parking lot. When I finally turned around, the man was standing in the doorway, just watching me. He didn't chase me. He just stood there, the alarm blaring behind him, until I was out of sight. I never told anyone what happened. Not my friends, not my parents. I don't even know if they would have believed me. I went camping alone up in the mountains last spring, just to get away from everything for a few days. It's something I like to do from time to time, the quiet, the solitude, the chance to just clear my mind. I'm not someone who gets nervous easily, especially not in nature. I've been on countless hikes and camping trips. So, when I set up camp at a little clearing just off the main trail, I thought it would be another peaceful night. The weather was perfect, and I was feeling good. I had a small fire going, just enough to cook my dinner and keep the bugs away. It was about dusk, and I was sitting on a log by the fire, eating some canned chili. That's when I heard footsteps. At first, I figured it was a deer or some other animal, but the sound was too steady, too deliberate. I tensed up, standing up slowly and turning toward the noise. Out of the trees stepped a man, maybe in his mid-30s. He looked scruffy, hair long and unkempt, clothes worn and dusty, like he'd been walking for a long time. He didn't look dangerous at first, but something about the way he approached made my stomach tighten. He smiled, and I could tell it wasn't the kind of smile that made you feel at ease. "Hey there," he said, his voice rough, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. "You got a minute?" I was hesitant but didn't want to be rude. "Sure, what's up?" "I'm just lost," he said, walking closer to my fire. "Been walking for hours, trying to find the trail again. You wouldn't happen to have a map, would you?" I glanced at the small map I had tucked in my bag and then back at him. Something felt off. His clothes were too worn for someone just out for a hike, and there was a smell to him, damp, musty, and a little like sweat. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I offered him a quick smile. "Yeah, I've got one, but I'm not sure you're too far off the trail. You should be able to find it if you head north." He nodded like he was listening, but then just stood there. And for a moment, he didn't say anything. His eyes just stayed on me, almost studying me, like he was trying to figure something out. I didn't like the way he was looking at me. It felt like he wasn't interested in finding the trail anymore, like he was waiting for me to invite him to stay. "You camping out here?" he asked, his voice much softer now, like we were having a casual conversation. I wasn't sure how to answer. The tone of his voice had shifted. He wasn't just lost anymore. He was interested in something else. "Yeah, just for a few nights." He nodded again, taking a few steps closer to the fire. Too close. I took a step back without thinking, suddenly feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't want to be rude, but I wasn't about to let some random guy get too close to me in the middle of nowhere. "You alone?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Seems kind of dangerous out here all by yourself, don't it?" I forced a smile, trying to keep the conversation light. "It's not too bad. I'm used to it." He didn't seem convinced. "You ever worry someone might show up, though?" "Someone like me?" That hit me like a cold wave, and I froze. His words hung in the air, almost like a threat disguised as a joke. I didn't know if I should laugh it off or if I should take it seriously. I decided not to engage, hoping he'd get the hint. "Look, I should probably get some sleep," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's getting late." But he didn't move. Instead, he leaned against a tree, just standing there, staring at me with that same unsettling gaze. "You got a tent set up, or are you just sleeping under the stars?" he asked, his voice calm, but there was something in it, something almost too calm, like he was probing for more. I didn't answer right away. I was trying to keep my thoughts together, but the unease I felt was growing. I glanced at my tent, then back at him. His posture had changed. He was no longer just standing still. He was leaning in slightly, almost like he was waiting for me to say something, anything. "I'm good for the night," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm just gonna get some rest. You should probably head out before it gets too dark." But he didn't leave. He just kept standing there. I could hear him shifting, like he was trying to make himself comfortable without really moving away. I tried to stay calm, but everything inside me was screaming to just get in the tent and zip myself up. The man took a step closer. "You ever think about what would happen if someone didn't leave?" That was it. That was the moment I realized I was dealing with someone who wasn't just lost. He wasn't just a drifter passing through. He was trying to make me feel small, make me uncomfortable, make me unsure. And in that moment, I knew I had to act. "I think you should go," I said, my voice low but firm. "Now." His smile didn't fade, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something that made the blood in my veins freeze. For a second, he just stood there, looking at me like he was trying to decide whether to push it further. Then, without saying another word, he turned and started walking away, his footsteps slow and deliberate, almost like he was savoring the moment. As he moved further into the trees, I couldn't help but watch him, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence that followed was deafening, and I was still holding my breath, waiting for him to turn around, to come back, too. But he didn't. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours lying in my tent, listening to the noises around me. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the wind in the trees, made my heart race. I was afraid to fall asleep, afraid that he'd come back, or worse, that he'd already be waiting for me outside. At dawn, I packed up my things and left. I didn't care about the hike I had planned. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. I didn't look back. I couldn't. As I drove away, I kept thinking about the way he'd looked at me, about his words. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had known exactly what he was doing. And if I hadn't stood my ground, I don't know what might have happened. I haven't been camping since. I don't know if I ever will again. I can't get the image of him standing there, just watching me, out of my head. I don't think I'll ever feel safe out there again. I was driving home that night from a late meeting. It had been raining hard for hours, the kind of rain that makes it feel like you're driving through a sheet of water. The road was slick, and visibility was getting worse by the minute. I wasn't far from the exit to my neighborhood, just a quiet stretch of highway I knew well. Not much happened out there at night. It was mostly empty except for the occasional car, but tonight it seemed quieter than usual. I had just passed the old gas station when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another car pulled over to the side, waiting for the rain to pass. But then I saw the hazard lights flashing. No one was around, and the car was in a weird position, almost like it had been abandoned. I couldn't tell from a distance whether it was just someone waiting for help, but something about the situation made me uneasy. There was no reason for a car to be stopped in the middle of nowhere in the rain, especially with those hazard lights on, blinking in the storm. I slowed down, rolling the window down a little, trying to get a better look. No other cars were in sight, and the road was so empty that the sight of a single car with its lights flashing stood out like a sore thumb. I couldn't just keep driving by without checking. The rational part of me told me I should call the police, but I figured if someone needed help, I should at least see what was going on. I pulled over a few feet behind the car, the tires skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. It was a mid-sized sedan, an older model, its rear bumper dented. I couldn't see any signs of what might have happened, but it was just too odd, sitting there, lights on, engine off, like someone had left it in a hurry. I got out of my car, keeping an eye on the road. No cars in sight, just the rain pouring down. The car I was walking toward had its driver's side door wide open. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer, listening to the soft thrum of the rain against the pavement. The rain was so heavy that I barely heard anything else, but there was something about the scene that felt wrong, too quiet. The door was still ajar when I reached it. I leaned in and looked inside. That's when I saw it. The seat was soaked, but not from the rain. The car was a mess, papers scattered on the floor, and the driver's seat was turned awkwardly to the side. The first thing I noticed was the blood. It wasn't a lot, but there were smears on the seat, on the steering wheel, and on the door. It looked like someone had been dragged out of the car, or maybe forced into it. The blood wasn't fresh, but it was still visible enough that I could tell something violent had happened. My stomach turned, and I took a step back, unsure of what I should do next. I looked around. The rain was coming down in sheets, and it felt like I was the only one around. No one else had stopped, and the road was empty. I glanced back into the car, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was a bag on the passenger seat, just sitting there, like the owner had dropped it in a hurry. I don't know why, but I reached inside the car and pulled the bag out. It felt wrong touching someone else's stuff like that, but I couldn't help myself. Maybe I thought there was something inside that would explain what had happened, some sign that could make sense of all this. I unzipped it slowly, my hands shaking more than I expected, and found a wallet, a few personal items, and a phone. The phone had a cracked screen, but when I turned it over, the first thing I noticed was a message on the screen, one of those text notifications that didn't require unlocking. The message was simple: get to the car. Now! It was sent about 15 minutes ago. My blood ran cold. The phone wasn't recent, it had been sitting there for a while. But the message was fresh. Who was it for? I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of it. Someone had been here recently. But where were they now? And what had happened to them? I glanced around, my mind racing. Suddenly, I heard a noise, soft at first, but then louder. Footsteps. I froze, turning my head slowly. My heart hammered in my chest, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Someone else was out there. I didn't wait around to find out who. I shoved the bag back inside the car, my pulse racing. I started to back away, my eyes darting around the dark, wet landscape. The rain felt colder now, as if the air had suddenly dropped several degrees. I rushed to my car, almost slipping in the rain as I got back inside. I locked the door before I even turned the engine on, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline. I looked through the rearview mirror. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to see, but I didn't see anything at first. No one was following me, but I didn't feel safe. My heart was still racing. My mind kept going back to the blood, the message on the phone, the odd feeling of being watched. I drove off quickly, my tires skidding slightly as I accelerated, trying to leave the scene behind me. but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The blood in the car. The phone. The message. I drove for what felt like forever before I finally pulled over at a gas station, my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. I tried to catch my breath, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept thinking about the car, the blood, the message. What had really happened there? Who was hurt? And where were they now? I thought about calling the police, but what could I tell them? I hadn't seen anything that could help them. No one else was around. There was no sign of a struggle outside the car, just the blood inside. I didn't have answers, and that scared me even more. I didn't know what was happening, and the longer I stayed in that spot, the more I felt like I was part of something I didn't understand. The only thing I knew for sure was that whatever happened, it wasn't over. I wasn't sure if it would be for me or someone else next, but the whole experience left me with a deep sense of unease. Something bad had happened out there, and I was far from the only one affected. I was in a rush that day. I had just finished an important meeting for work, and I needed to get to my next appointment on time. I didn't want to waste time waiting for a taxi, so I opened up the Carpool app on my phone and booked a ride. It was one of those things I'd used a few times before, but I had never really thought much about it until that day. The driver's name popped up on my phone, Derek. His profile picture looked like it was taken in a park, with the sun shining behind him. It looked normal enough. I confirmed the ride, and within minutes, I saw his car pulling up outside the building. When I opened the door and got in, everything seemed fine. He greeted me with a smile, and I nodded back, not thinking too much of it. The car was clean, a little older than I expected, but still fine for a quick ride. I didn't really pay attention to the details of his appearance at first. I just wanted to get to my destination and get on with my day. I gave him the address for my next meeting, and we pulled away from the curb. We started out like any normal ride. The usual small talk. He asked how my day was going, if I had any plans for the weekend. I didn't mind, though. I wasn't in the mood to talk much, but I gave him short answers. The ride felt uneventful. But after a few minutes, I noticed something. I didn't recognize the streets he was taking. At first, I thought maybe he was just taking a different route, or maybe there was traffic on the usual road. But the streets were getting quieter. The buildings were looking more rundown. We were moving further away from the busy part of the city where my meeting was supposed to be. "Excuse me, I think you've missed my stop," I said, trying to stay calm, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond immediately, just kept driving. The silence between us grew thick. I tried again, a little firmer this time. "I need to go to, address." "You're going the wrong way." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes catching mine. There was something about the way he looked at me that made my stomach twist. It wasn't that he seemed angry or even annoyed. It was more like he wasn't really hearing me. His eyes had an almost vacant look to them. I know, he said, his voice calm, too calm. "I'll get you there. Just a little detour first, don't worry." A detour? That didn't make sense. I had used the app enough times to know that the usual route was straightforward, nothing complicated, no detours. My office wasn't far from where I had been dropped off, and the destination was right in the middle of a busy part of the city. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice now a little tighter. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he just kept driving, taking a sharp turn onto a street I didn't recognize. I could feel my nerves start to tighten. Something was wrong. My instinct told me that I needed to get out of the car. I reached for my phone in my bag, ready to text my colleague or call for help, but I didn't want to make any sudden movements. I didn't know this man. I didn't know what he might do. "Could you stop the car, please?" I asked, my voice much more forceful now. I'm not comfortable with this. He finally spoke again, but his tone had changed. It wasn't casual anymore. It was almost cold, like he wasn't speaking to a passenger anymore. "I told you, don't worry. We're almost there." That's when I noticed it. The neighborhood was getting worse. The buildings were crumbling, the streets were barely lit, and there weren't many cars on the road. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This was not the area I needed to be in. I wasn't familiar with this place, but I could tell it was a bad part of town. The kind of place you didn't go alone, especially not when the sun was setting. I started to panic, but I didn't want to let him know. I tried to keep my voice steady when I spoke again. "I really need you to stop, right here. Please." He looked at me through the rearview mirror again, and this time, there was something off about his smile. It wasn't a friendly smile anymore. It was more like a knowing grin, the kind that made my blood run cold. "Just relax," he said, his voice low. "You're going to be fine." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my hands sweating as I gripped my phone tighter. The fear was starting to wash over me now, and I didn't know how to shake it. I had been in uncomfortable situations before, but this was different. This wasn't a normal ride. Suddenly, he turned the car down an alleyway. It was so dark I could barely see anything outside. I was starting to feel trapped, completely at his mercy. I had no idea where we were going, and I had no idea how to get out of this situation. I tried to reach for the door handle, but the locks clicked in place. "Stop the car," I said, my voice cracking. "Please. I need to get out. Now." But he just kept driving. I could hear him humming to himself, the sound making the entire situation feel even more surreal. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever he was planning. I knew I had to act fast. In one swift motion, I unlocked the door and flung it open. The car was moving slowly enough that I could jump out without injuring myself. My feet hit the pavement, and I ran without looking back. I didn't care if he followed me. I didn't care if he came after me. All I cared about was getting away from that car, from him. I didn't even stop to check if anyone was around. I just ran. I don't know how far I ran, but eventually I found a busy street. People were walking around, and I could see a store with lights on. I ran into the store, breathless, my heart still pounding in my chest. The store clerk gave me a strange look, but I didn't care. I told them I needed to call the police, and they let me use the phone. When the police arrived, they checked the area for the car. They found it a few blocks down, parked and empty. No sign of the driver. They said they would investigate, but honestly, I was too shaken to think about it much more. I just wanted to get out of that area. I never used the Carpool app again after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something worse. Something I couldn't even put into words. I still don't know what that man's intentions were. But I know one thing for sure, he wasn't planning to take me where I needed to go. And I'm just thankful I got out in time. I had been job hunting for months when I got an email about an interview. It was for a position I'd applied to a few weeks earlier, some kind of administrative role. The email came from someone named Daniel Rowe, the hiring manager. The company, Bridgepoint Solutions seemed legit. They had a basic website, nothing fancy, just enough to show they existed. The interview was set for 5 p.m. on a Friday. I remember thinking it was a weird time, but I didn't question it. The address was in the industrial area on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't far, maybe a 20-minute drive from my apartment. When I got there, it was already getting dark. The building was a large, gray structure, the kind of place you'd expect to see offices for logistics or manufacturing companies. The parking lot was almost empty except for a few cars scattered around. That felt strange, but I told myself it was because it was late on a Friday. I parked and walked to the front door. It looked clean and well kept, with a small plaque that read Bridgepoint Solutions. I pressed the buzzer, and a voice came through the speaker. "Come in." "Second floor," the man said. The door clicked, unlocking, and I stepped inside. The lobby was quiet. Too quiet. There was no receptionist, just an empty desk with a stack of outdated magazines. The air felt still, like no one had been there in a while. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe they were cutting costs or working remotely. I took the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was dimly lit, and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. There were several doors, all closed. At the end of the hall was one door slightly ajar with a light on inside. A small sign next to it read Conference Room B. I knocked. "Come in," the same voice said. I stepped inside, and a man stood up from the table. He looked ordinary, dark hair, a button-up shirt, probably mid-40s. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You must be Emily," he said, holding out his hand. "Yes," I said, shaking it. His grip was firm, too firm, and his hand was cold. Something about him put me on edge, but I couldn't pinpoint what. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he was studying me. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to a chair across the table. The room was sparse. Just a table, a few chairs, and a whiteboard with nothing written on it. No laptops, no paperwork, no sign of any actual business. I sat down, my stomach twisting. "So, tell me about yourself," he said, leaning forward. I started talking about my work experience, but he barely listened. His eyes were locked on mine the entire time, unblinking. He didn't take notes, didn't ask follow-up questions. When I paused, he just smiled again, that same empty smile. "Interesting," he said after a moment. "You seem very qualified." "Thank you," I said, forcing a smile. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like he was sizing me up. The silence stretched on too long. "Do you live nearby?" he asked suddenly. That question threw me. It had nothing to do with the job. About 20 minutes away," I said cautiously. He nodded, as if that was important information. "Do you live alone?" Now I was alarmed. That had nothing to do with the interview. I laughed nervously. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," he said, sitting back in his chair. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, watching my every move. I decided I had enough. "I don't think this is relevant to the position," I said, standing up. "Thank you for your time." "Sit down," he said, his voice low and firm. I froze. There was no friendliness in his tone anymore. He stood up, blocking the door. My heart started pounding. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I think we're done here," I said, stepping toward the door. "You're not going anywhere," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a knife, the blade catching the light. My blood ran cold. "Don't scream," he said. If you do, I'll make this worse for you. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. The room was small, and he was between me and the door. Please, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I won't tell anyone. Just let me go. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, the knife glinting in his hand. I backed up until I hit the wall, my breathing quick and shallow. Then I remembered my phone. It was in my bag, slung over the back of the chair. He hadn't taken it. If I could just distract him for a moment. Why are you doing this? I asked, trying to keep him talking. He smiled again, that same empty smile. Because I can, he said simply. While he spoke, I inched toward the chair, my fingers brushing the strap of my bag. I grabbed it and yanked it toward me, pretending to stumble. The movement startled him, and he lunged at me. I screamed and swung the bag at him with all my strength. It hit his arm, knocking the knife to the floor. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the chair and slammed it into his chest, sending him stumbling back. I ran for the door, yanking it open and bolting down the hallway. He was right behind me, his footsteps pounding against the floor. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst. I reached the stairs and practically threw myself down them, skipping steps, nearly falling. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. When I reached the lobby, I ran straight for the door, fumbling with the lock. He was halfway down the stairs when I finally got it open. I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and locked the doors just as he burst out of the building. He pounded on the driver's side window, yelling something I couldn't hear over my own panic breathing. I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, not stopping until I was miles away. When I finally pulled over, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The police didn't find him. When they searched the building, it was empty, and the knife was gone. The company? It didn't exist. The website was a fake, probably set up just to lure people like me. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten out of there, but I don't want to think about it. We'd been driving for hours when the storm hit. The kind of rain that makes it hard to see anything beyond a few feet in front of you, and the wind that howled like it was angry at the world. My partner, Sarah, was behind the wheel, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to keep the car steady on the slick, winding road. I could tell she was getting frustrated with the rain, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make it worse. It wasn't like we were in a rush or anything. We'd been taking the scenic route, trying to avoid the crowded highways, but now it felt like we were completely alone out here. The road was narrow, surrounded by thick woods on both sides, and there was nothing around for miles, no signs of life, no houses, no other cars. The occasional flash of lightning lit up the sky, but even that felt like it was miles away, swallowed by the storm. The rain was pouring down so hard that the wipers couldn't keep up, and the road was barely visible. I kept glancing at the side of the road, just trying to make out anything. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a pile of debris, but as we got closer, I realized it was a makeshift roadblock. A bunch of thick branches and logs were piled up across the road, blocking our way completely. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine, and I felt my stomach twist. "Sarah, stop the car," I said, my voice tight. "There's something in the road." She didn't need me to tell her twice. She slammed the brakes, and we came to a screeching halt. The rain was still coming down in sheets, and all I could hear was the pounding of it on the roof of the car. "Are you sure it's just debris?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Doesn't look like it." Someone put it there on purpose, I said, my heart racing a little faster. We should check it out. She didn't say anything. I could tell she was already getting anxious, but she pulled the car to the side of the road and turned off the engine. We both sat there for a second, staring out into the storm. Stay in the car, Sarah said finally. I'll go see if I can move it. I opened my mouth to protest, but she was already getting out, her door slamming shut behind her. I sat there for a moment, watching her, hoping she'd be okay. The rain made it hard to see much more than a few feet ahead, and the storm was only getting worse. The wind was howling, and it felt like the whole world was coming apart. I was already regretting suggesting we stop. I looked out the window and watched Sarah walk toward the roadblock. She had her coat pulled tightly around her, her head down to shield herself from the rain, and I could barely see her through the sheets of water coming down. I noticed her pause when she reached the logs, bending down to try to move one of the branches out of the way. But something didn't sit right with me. It was too quiet. No other cars had passed, and there was no one else around. I opened the door, just slightly, to get a better look. And that's when I heard it. A soft rustling sound. A few quick, muffled footsteps in the wet grass behind me. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my pulse quickened. It was so quiet for a moment that I thought maybe it was just my imagination, but then I heard the sound again, closer this time. I turned my head slowly, my eyes scanning the area, but there was no one there. Just the thick shadows cast by the trees, the rain, and the occasional flash of lightning illuminating everything for a second before it went dark again. I should have stayed in the car, but something made me get out. I stepped into the rain, pulling my jacket tighter around me. I was about to call out to Sarah when I saw her standing there, motionless, staring into the trees. Her back was to me, and she didn't seem to notice that I'd gotten out. I felt a sharp tug of fear in my chest. Something was wrong. Sarah? I called, my voice shaking a little. She didn't answer. I took a step closer, trying to ignore the cold feeling creeping up my spine. I wanted to call out again, but before I could, I heard the noise. Not from Sarah. From behind me. A low voice, barely above a whisper, but it was unmistakable. What are you doing here? I spun around, heart racing, but no one was there. The trees swayed violently in the wind, the rain coming down in sheets, but no one stepped out from the shadows. I was sure I had heard something. Someone. I turned back to Sarah, my eyes scanning the area around her. And then I saw them. Two figures, emerging from the trees, their silhouettes barely visible in the rain. At first, I thought they were just shadows, but as they got closer, I could see them more clearly. Two men, wearing dark raincoats, their faces hidden by hoods. They didn't seem to be in any hurry, just slowly walking toward us. Sarah. I yelled, my voice cracking. Get back to the car. But she didn't hear me. She just stood there, staring ahead, her face pale. The two men were almost to us now, and I could see the faint glint of something shiny in their hands, a knife, maybe, or something else. I couldn't tell. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I had a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. These weren't just people looking for help. I had no idea who they were, but I knew they weren't friendly. The first man spoke again, his voice low, dangerous. We don't like people wandering through here. I took a step back, my mind racing. What do you want? We're just passing through. We don't want any trouble. Too bad, the second man said, his voice cold. You should have stayed on the main road. My mind was screaming at me to run. But there was no way I could leave Sarah here. I had to get her back to the car. I looked around quickly, trying to find some way out, but I couldn't see anything. We were too far from help. The storm made everything disorienting. The men were closing in now, and I had no idea what they were planning to do. The first man raised his hand, and that's when I saw the knife. The glint of steel in the low light of the storm. I grabbed Sarah's arm as hard as I could, yanking her toward the car. "Get in the car. Now!" She didn't resist, but she looked confused, like she couldn't understand what was happening. I pulled her with me, her feet slipping in the wet mud, and we both tumbled into the car, slamming the doors shut behind us. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking, and I started the engine. The two men were still standing at the roadblock, watching us. They didn't move, but they didn't look away either. I slammed the car into reverse, the tires spinning on the wet ground, but I finally got enough traction to back up. I didn't even check the mirrors, just slammed it into drive and sped down the road. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, and even then, I don't think we ever really felt safe. I don't know what those men wanted, or why they decided to trap us there, but I'm just glad we got out. I never want to be that far off the beaten path again. And I sure as hell never want to come across a roadblock in the middle of nowhere, not knowing who's behind it. The storm passed, but the fear didn't. I've been putting off telling this story for a while, but it's been weighing on me, and I just need to get it out. I don't know if anyone will believe me, but what happened to me was real. I'll start from the beginning, even though every time I think about it, I can't help but get a little shaky. It was supposed to be a peaceful solo hike. I've been camping and hiking for years, so I wasn't worried about being out there alone. I know how to navigate, how to read maps, and I always made sure I'm prepared. I picked a trail that was relatively remote. It was one I'd heard about from a few friends but had never been on myself. It seemed perfect. Quiet, not a lot of people, and I figured I'd have a nice few days in the woods to clear my head. The first day was perfect. The weather was clear, the trail wasn't too difficult, and I was enjoying the silence. I didn't see anyone else out there, which was exactly what I wanted. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the dirt and the occasional bird calling from above. By late afternoon, I found a good spot by a small creek, set up my tent, and built a fire. It was peaceful. I spent the evening reading and cooking a simple meal. It was the second day when things started to get strange. I woke up early, packed up my stuff, and hit the trail again. The path took me deeper into the woods, where the trees were thick and the air was cooler. About halfway through the day, I stopped for a break, sitting on a log by the side of the trail. I was sipping water from my bottle when I noticed something strange, a carving on a tree, just off the trail. It wasn't big, but it was clear enough to see, and it looked recent. The message was simple: turn back. Danger ahead. I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't unusual to see carvings or markings on trees in remote areas. Sometimes people leave messages or trail markers. I figured it was just someone's idea of a joke or maybe a warning from another hiker who'd gotten turned around. Still, it was a little unsettling. I looked around to see if anyone else was nearby, but the woods were still, no movement at all. It was completely silent. I stood up, wiped my hands on my pants, and decided to continue on. I wasn't about to let some random carving scare me off. I've been hiking enough to know that not every warning should be taken seriously. I was determined to keep going, so I didn't even hesitate. The next couple of hours felt fine. The trail was challenging, but not too difficult. I was enjoying the solitude again, not thinking about the carving anymore. I wasn't entirely focused on the trail, though, and I kept noticing things that felt off. Little things at first, like hearing twigs snapping behind me, or the sound of something moving through the brush, just out of sight. I thought it was probably just animals, maybe a deer or something, so I didn't pay it much attention. But then it started happening more frequently. It was the moment I reached a small clearing that I felt it for the first time, this nagging feeling that I wasn't alone. It wasn't just the usual sense of being in nature. This felt different. I didn't hear any footsteps or see anyone, but it was like someone was watching me from behind the trees. I glanced around, but I didn't see anyone. I tried to push the feeling aside. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I sat down for a minute, took out my map, and checked my position. I knew the trail was going to split soon, and I was looking for the marker that would tell me which path to take. When I stood up to keep going, I heard it again this time. I was sure of it. A twig snapped behind me, followed by a low rustling sound. It was too close to be an animal, and it wasn't the wind. I froze. I didn't turn around right away. I just stood there, listening. For a long time, nothing happened. But the silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. My heart started to pound, and I could feel the sweat on my palms. I glanced over my shoulder, but the woods were still. No one was there. I started walking faster, hoping it was nothing. I kept going for maybe another hour, my pace quickening with every step. The further I went, the more the feeling of being followed grew. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid, but it was hard to ignore. The rustling behind me seemed to be getting closer. Every time I stopped for a break, I would hear it again, those same sounds, just out of sight. By now, my nerves were shot. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was walking behind me, always just far enough away that I couldn't see them. It was like they were mimicking my movements, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved. My stomach was in knots, and my mind kept going back to that carving on the tree, turn back. Danger ahead. I told myself to calm down. Maybe it was just another hiker, someone who was taking a different route. But as the hours went on, I started to doubt that. The woods around me had grown darker, and the atmosphere was thick with an oppressive quiet. There were no other sounds, no birds, no wind. Just me and the rustling behind me. I came to another clearing, but this one felt different. There was something off about it. The ground was bare, no grass, just dirt, and the trees surrounding it looked twisted, like they'd been bent in odd shapes. As I stepped into the clearing, I heard the noise again, louder this time. Someone was close. Too close. I froze again, and this time, I didn't turn around. I stood perfectly still, holding my breath, listening. The rustling stopped, and for a moment, I thought maybe I was just imagining it. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. There was someone standing just at the edge of the trees, barely visible. I could see them, but they weren't moving. Just standing there, watching me. My heart raced. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't see their face, but I knew they had to be looking at me. I took a deep breath, turned on my heel, and started running. I didn't care if I was on the trail or not. I just wanted to get away. My lungs burned as I pushed myself, my legs aching with each step. I didn't stop running until I found a small ridge and made my way down to a stream. I followed the stream for what felt like hours, too scared to look back, too scared to stop. Eventually, I made it to a campground I recognized, and by that point, I was a mess. I could still feel their presence in my mind, and the thought of turning around to face whatever was back there made me sick to my stomach. I never did find out who or what was following me, but I know for sure that I shouldn't have ignored that warning. I was sitting in the middle row of the theater, halfway through a thriller movie, when the fire alarm went off. It wasn't just a beep, it was the loud, piercing kind that makes your heart jump. The screen went dark, and the house lights flickered on. People started murmuring and looking around. No smoke, no flames, just a blaring alarm. A few ushers ran down the aisles, waving their hands and shouting for everyone to head to the exits. I grabbed my bag and followed the crowd. The main doors were a bottleneck, with everyone pushing and shoving. I decided to try the emergency exit near the screen instead. It wasn't a big crowd at the theater that night, so only a couple of others were heading that way. I figured it'd be faster. The hallway behind the emergency door was dimly lit and felt colder than it should have been. The exit sign was glowing red at the far end. I moved quickly, my sneakers squeaking on the tiled floor, but when I reached the door, it didn't budge. I pushed harder, then tried pulling. Nothing. Locked. I said aloud, my voice bouncing off the walls. I turned back and saw that the others who had followed me were already gone. Maybe they'd gone back to the main exit. I felt the unease start creeping in. The alarm was still going, muffled now by the walls. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man in a uniform. He came from the direction I just walked, his footsteps echoing. He looked like security, dark pants, a matching jacket, and a radio clipped to his belt. "Need help?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost too calm for the situation. "Yeah," I said. "This door's locked. Shouldn't it open during an alarm?" He stopped a few feet away, tilting his head like he was sizing me up. "Sometimes they malfunction," he said. "I can help you find another way out." I nodded, relieved. He motioned for me to follow, and I did, though something about him felt off. His uniform wasn't quite right, no patches, no name tag. His boots looked more like work boots than the kind security guards wear. As we walked, he kept glancing back at me. His eyes were dark and sharp, like he was studying me instead of the surroundings. I slowed down, letting a bit more distance grow between us. "Where are we going?" I asked. "There's another exit at the back," he said, without turning around. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, and the lights seemed dimmer now. I didn't hear anyone else, no voices, no footsteps, just the faint hum of the alarm in the distance. "Are you sure?" I asked again. He stopped abruptly and turned to face me. His face was blank, but his eyes were intense, like he was daring me to question him again. "Do you want to get out or not?" he asked. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. I nodded but didn't move closer. He turned back around and started walking again, slower this time, like he was waiting for me to follow. I glanced over my shoulder, wondering if I should just run back the way I came, but the hallway behind me seemed darker now. I took a deep breath and followed, keeping my steps light. A few minutes later, we reached a door. He pushed it open, and I expected to see the parking lot or another part of the theater, but it was just another hallway, narrower than the last. "This doesn't feel right," I said, stopping in my tracks. He turned around again, this time with a faint smirk on his face. "You don't trust me?" I didn't answer. I glanced at his radio, wondering if it even worked. He noticed and let out a short laugh. "You think I'm not real security, huh?" he said. He stepped closer, and I stepped back. My heart was pounding now. "Where are we really going?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a keyring. I didn't wait to find out what he was unlocking. I turned and bolted back down the hallway. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice echoing. I didn't look back. My legs were moving faster than they ever had, my breath coming in short gasps. The hallway felt endless, but I could see the faint glow of the exit sign in the distance. The sound of his boots pounding against the floor got louder. He was chasing me. I reached the door I tried earlier, the one that had been locked. I slammed into it, pushing with all my weight. It still didn't move. Come on, I whispered, frantically looking for a way out. His footsteps were almost on me. I turned just as he reached out, his hand grazing my arm. I ducked and slipped past him, running back the way I'd come. "Get back here," he yelled. I didn't stop. I turned a corner and saw a door with a small window. Light was streaming through it. The main lobby. I pushed through the door and stumbled into the lobby, where a group of people was gathered near the main exits. They all turned to look at me, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. "Help!" I shouted. "He's chasing me." I pointed back toward the hallway, but when I turned, the man was gone. A few ushers came over, asking me what happened. I tried to explain, but I could barely catch my breath. They called the police, and I waited with them until officers arrived. They searched the building but didn't find anyone matching the description I gave. The emergency exit door had been locked from the outside, and no one could explain why. I never went back to that theater again. I decided to take a hike last weekend. I'd been stressed with work, and the idea of being out in the woods, away from everything, felt like exactly what I needed. I picked a trail in a remote area that wasn't too far from where I lived but wasn't overly popular. I didn't want crowds or noise. Just peace. The weather was perfect, cool and overcast, with a slight breeze. I parked my car at the small gravel lot by the trailhead and noticed only one other vehicle there, a beat-up truck with no plates on the front. That should have stood out more to me, but at the time, it didn't register as anything unusual. I chalked it up to a local hunter or someone who preferred the quiet like I did. The first mile or so was uneventful. The woods were dense, and the trail was narrow, but it was well marked. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. It was exactly what I hoped for. But then, just as the trail dipped into a small valley, I noticed something odd. Footprints in the mud. They were fresh, and they weren't mine. At first, I didn't think much of it. People hike all the time, and maybe whoever left them was ahead of me somewhere. Still, I couldn't help but look closer. The prints were deep, heavier than my own, and spaced in a way that suggested the person was walking at a steady, deliberate pace. I kept going, trying to brush it off. But as I moved, something started to feel off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stopped a few times to listen, but the forest was quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no birds, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. About 20 minutes later, the trail split into two paths. I decided to take the left one, mostly because it looked less traveled, and I wanted to avoid running into anyone. As I started down it, I glanced back at the footprints in the mud. They veered left too, right where I was going. That was when I started to get uneasy. There hadn't been anyone at the trailhead when I arrived except for that old truck, and I hadn't seen or heard another soul since starting. So who was out here, and why were their prints matching mine? I picked up my pace, trying to put some distance between myself and the thought of someone else being nearby. But every time I glanced back, I saw more footprints, fresh ones, heading in the same direction as me. It was as if whoever it was had sped up when I did. I stopped walking and turned around, scanning the trail behind me. Nothing. Just the trees and the path stretching back up the hill. I stood there for what felt like forever, straining to hear something, anything. But the woods stayed silent. I decided to change direction. I didn't want to head back to the car yet, but I figured cutting across the forest would shake whoever it was, if there even was someone. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the prints were just a coincidence. Still, I veered off the trail, stepping carefully over rocks and fallen branches to avoid leaving obvious tracks. The forest felt different once I was off the trail. The trees were closer together, their branches reaching down like they were trying to trap me. The ground was uneven, covered in moss and leaves, and it was harder to keep my bearings. But I pushed on, determined to lose whatever was making me uneasy. After about 10 minutes, I came to a small clearing and stopped to catch my breath. That's when I saw them again. Footprints. Right in the damp earth at the edge of the clearing. They were fresh, and they were mine, or almost mine. The spacing was too perfect, too deliberate, like someone had been following my exact path. My chest tightened, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. I wasn't imagining this. Someone was out here, and they were following me. My first thought was to call for help, but when I pulled out my phone, there was no signal. Of course. It was too remote for any reception. I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was a hunter or another hiker, someone who'd taken an interest in my route but didn't mean any harm. But why stay hidden? Why not call out or pass me by? And how had they matched my steps so perfectly? I decided to keep moving. If I stayed still, I'd just give them more time to close in. I cut back toward the trail, keeping my movements quick but quiet. I didn't care about the footprints anymore. I just wanted to get back to my car. The trail felt longer than I remembered, and every step was filled with the nagging sense that I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I never saw anyone. Just trees, shadows, and the occasional flicker of movement that I couldn't quite place. Finally, I reached the last stretch of the trail. I could see the gravel lot through the trees, and my car was still there. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. The truck was gone. I broke into a jog, my heart pounding in my chest. The lot was empty except for my car. No sign of anyone else. No sign of the person who had been following me. I fumbled with my keys, glancing around the lot and the edge of the forest. It was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. I got into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the lot, I checked my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the tree line, watching me. But there was no one. The drive home felt endless. I kept looking at the road behind me, convinced I'd see headlights or a shadowy figure trailing me. But nothing happened. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window and sat in the dark, trying to make sense of it all. I haven't gone back to that trail since. I probably never will. I can't stop thinking about the footprints, how they matched mine so perfectly, and how I never once saw the person who left them. Whoever they were, they knew how to stay hidden. And they wanted me to know I wasn't alone. The ATM was bathed in pale blue light, a lonely beacon on an otherwise quiet street. I had parked my car just a few feet away, keeping the engine running for warmth. It was late, close to midnight, and the crisp night air felt sharper than usual. The kind of cold that cuts through your jacket and settles in your bones. I wasn't planning to stay long. Just a quick withdrawal, enough cash to cover a few things I needed the next day. I glanced over my shoulder as I stepped up to the machine. The street was empty, except for a few parked cars scattered down the block. Nothing moved. No pedestrians, no traffic. A faint hum from the streetlights was the only sound. It was quiet, too quiet, but that's what I liked about this time of night. Fewer people, less hassle. The ATM whirred as I punched in my PIN and selected the withdrawal amount. I reached into my pocket, half distracted, fiddling with my phone to check my messages. The machine spat out the cash, and I grabbed the bills, stuffing them into my wallet. That's when I heard it. A faint rustle, like shoes scraping against pavement. At first, I thought it was just the wind kicking up some debris, but then it came again, closer this time. A deliberate step. I froze, my hand still on my wallet, and turned slowly. A man emerged from the shadows near the corner of the building. He wasn't tall, but he was solidly built, wearing a dark hoodie pulled up over his head. His face was partially obscured, but the glint of his eyes caught the light from the ATM. He wasn't running, wasn't rushing toward me, he was walking, slow and deliberate, like he already knew I wasn't going anywhere. "Hey," he said, his voice low and steady. "Don't make this hard." I felt my stomach drop. My grip on my wallet tightened instinctively, even as my brain screamed at me to stay calm. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sounding thinner than I intended. He stepped closer, and I could see the outline of something in his hand, a knife. Not huge, but sharp enough to get his point across. "The money," he said, nodding toward my wallet. "All of it. Now." My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I raised my hand slightly, trying to show I wasn't going to fight him. "All right, man, just take it easy," I said, fumbling with my wallet. I pulled out the cash I had just withdrawn and held it out to him. He snatched it quickly, but instead of walking away, he stayed put, his eyes narrowing. "That's it? That's all you got?" I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, that's all I took out." He didn't look convinced. His grip on the knife shifted slightly, and he took another step forward. "Nah, I think you've got more. And you're gonna get it for me." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "What?" "The ATM," he said, nodding toward it. "You're gonna take out more. And if this one doesn't let you, we'll go to another." I felt my knees go weak. This wasn't just a quick robbery anymore. He wanted to prolong this, to make me go along with whatever twisted plan he had in mind. "Look, I don't have a lot in my account," I said, trying to reason with him. "I can't." He cut me off with a sharp gesture, the blade catching the light. "Stop talking into what I say. You don't want this to get worse." I hesitated, my mind racing through my options. The ATM was right there, but my gut told me this wouldn't end with just another withdrawal. He was too calm, too methodical, and that terrified me more than anything. This wasn't his first time. "Fine," I said finally, stepping back toward the machine. My hands were shaking as I inserted my card and punched in my PIN again. The screen asked how much I wanted to withdraw, and I selected the maximum. It wasn't much, just a couple hundred, but it was all I could take out. The cash came out in a neat stack, and I handed it to him, hoping it would be enough to make him leave. But he just took it, stuffing it into his pocket without a word. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "Let's go," he said. My heart skipped a beat. "Go where?" He motioned toward my car with the knife. "To another ATM. I know there's more around here. We're gonna hit a few, see how much you can pull out." I felt trapped, cornered. If I got into that car with him, I had no idea what would happen next, but none of the possibilities were good. My thoughts were racing, trying to come up with a way out. "Look, man, you've got the cash," I said, trying to sound calm. "Just take it and go." I won't say anything, I swear. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. Get in the car. I didn't move. My body felt like it was frozen, caught between the urge to run and the fear of what would happen if I did. He took another step closer, and I could feel the sharp edge of the blade in his voice as he spoke again. Don't make me repeat myself. My mind was screaming at me to think, to act, to do something before it was too late. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw headlights approaching from down the street. A car, moving slowly, its engine humming softly in the distance. It was like a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the car coming closer, and then I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. Help! Call the police. My voice echoed off the empty buildings, loud and desperate. The man's expression twisted into anger, and he lunged toward me, but the sudden commotion must have startled him. The approaching car slowed down, its headlights washing over us, and I saw the man hesitate. For a split second, he seemed unsure of what to do. That was all I needed. I turned and ran, sprinting toward the car with everything I had. The driver, a middle-aged woman, looked shocked as I waved my arms frantically, shouting for help. She rolled down her window just as I reached her, and I blurted out, "He's got a knife. Call the police." Behind me, I heard the man curse loudly, but when I turned to look, he was already running the other way, disappearing into the shadows. The woman grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking as she tried to explain what had happened. I stayed by her car, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It felt like hours before the police arrived, though it was probably only a few minutes. I told them everything about the ATM, the knife, the cash, and the man's demand to take me to another machine. They took my statement, searched the area, but he was gone. I still think about that night. About how close I came to getting into that car, and what might have happened if I had. The police never found him, and I doubt they ever will. But every time I pass an ATM now, I feel that same knot in my stomach, the memory of those eyes watching me from the shadows.